Someone says, why do you think that? Cool. So Phil Zell, let me explain why I think beauty is evidence for God. Let's step back and I'm going to say let's look at three kind of facts of the world. And I'm going to present three facts, and I'm going to say that I think God is the best explanation for these facts that we have surrounding beauty. The first fact is that we often just find ourselves saying that nature's beautiful. We often walk outside and we say, oh wow, it's a beautiful day. Or we go on a hike and we go, oh man, that waterfall is beautiful. Or we look at a sunset in the desert and we're just like, oh, that's beautiful, that's sublime. We're often hit by the natural world and we just kind of feel provoked to attribute beauty to it, or to kind of put it in a more nerdy way. We kind of feel provoked to attribute kind of a positive aesthetic valuation to beauty in the natural world. So that's kind of fact one. We just often kind of find ourselves attributing beauty to the natural world. The second fact I'm going to say is we often seem to get hit by a type of profoundness when we experience beauty. Often when we look at something beautiful or hear something beautiful, we often feel like the beautiful thing is kind of important in and of itself. It is something that is important of itself. It has value intrinsically. And then the third kind of fact that I would point to is I think that we have a lot of intuitions about beauty that seem to indicate that beauty isn't just something that's subjective. It isn't just something, or it isn't just merely subjective. So let me give you an example of some of those intuitions. Suppose that you and I go to the top of a waterfall, or we go on a hike, and you have a mountain like this one, and let's say we're sitting on a mountain, and as we're sitting atop the mountain, we're looking down at the valley below, and we see that the sun is starting to set, and everything kind of basks in this warm glow. And you turn to me and you say, "Wow, Garb, isn't it beautiful up here?" And I say to you, "Ugh, that valley, ugh, that's horrid. That's ugly." And then I turn to a pile of feces that has maggots growing in it, maggots crawling in it, and I say, "This pile of feces, this is beautiful." And I take out my phone, I take a picture of the feces, I set it as my background on my phone. I send a picture of it to my mom, send a picture to my wife, and I'm like, "Oh, isn't this great?" You would think there's something psychologically wrong with me. You would probably regret ever coming into the woods with me to begin with. You'd be like, "Oh no, I made a mistake. I don't want to be alone with this guy. There's something wrong here." And it's not just a matter of opinion that the valley is more worthy of this response to beauty. There seems to be something objective there. Or for instance, suppose that you turn on the news and you hear about terrorists destroying a bunch of beautiful artifacts. You hear about a Rembrandt being slashed by a madman with a knife. That tends to give me a little jolt of anger. It kind of gives me this jolt of oh no, that beautiful thing had value, intrinsic value in and of itself, and that beautiful thing was destroyed. Or finally, I would just point out how we talk about our everyday language. So for instance, and I see people who are requesting to come up in the chat, I'll bring you up in just a second. In our everyday life, we say things like, "The waterfall is beautiful," which seems to be a straightforward statement about the object, comparable to, the box's cubicle. So with these three facts, I just think the best explanation for these facts is that the world is beautiful because it's the result of a cosmic artist. And the reason we get struck by this type of beauty is because the cosmic artist, like all artists, in a sense, puts himself into his work. And so when we get a glimpse of beauty, we're in a sense kind of getting a glimpse at God. Or to put this another way, it's really unlikely in our everyday lives when we experience things that are beautiful or provoke us to attributing beauty to them. It's often the case, it's almost always the case, that there's artistic intent behind that. It's really unlikely for something to come out profoundly beautiful if there was an artistic intent behind it. And so if we see that the natural world strikes us as being incredibly beautiful, the best explanation is that there was artistic intent behind it. So that's kind of my, in a nutshell, argument for why I think beauty is evidence for God. Now, I do see some people who are requesting to come up in the chat. So let's see. I'm going to bring up David because he's the first one in the chat. And feel free to keep on requesting to come up, you guys, and I'll try to take a little bit of time for each guest, but try to keep it flowing pretty well. Also, we have my friend Than at Exploring Reality, who I invited up, or he came up while I was chatting. How's it going, Than?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm just I originally wanted to come up here and troll, But
Okay, so Than just wants to troll. That's pretty traditional of him. It's pretty
I'll
classic
just
Than.
what I'll do is I'll just kind of like stay out of the conversations, and I'll hop in if I ever feel like I have anything meaningful to say, which will probably be pretty rare because everything I say is stupid.
I mean, I didn't say it. I might have thought it. It might be true, but I didn't say it. Than said it. So, hey, David, what's up?
Yeah, hey Garb, thanks for letting me come up here. Yeah, so I guess I'm not a theist, and I'm not an expert in biology or anything like that. So that's just like my thoughts off the cuff. But hearing you describe like the types of things that we find beautiful, right? Like right now it's stick season kind of in Arkansas, and summertime's gorgeous. There is tons of green trees, like it's beautiful, right? And right now it's not so much, but it's because all those trees are dead, you know. And I think that the types of things that we find beautiful are things that tend to be advantageous to us, right? We think that things that are full of life, things that are full of nutrients, like fruits and bright colors like that, we think those things are beautiful. We tend to think fecal matter, stuff that's kind of inherently repulsive to us, that would make us sick if we ingested, we think those things are ugly. We tend to be drawn towards healthy versions of things as the beautiful versions of things. And even like vistas, like great mountain valleys and stuff like that. It's advantageous as creatures for us to be able to have a large panorama perspective on things so we can see predators coming up. I think that there's probably an evolutionary drive within us to seek out those things. And so, in my view, what we find beautiful is oftentimes what is advantageous to our lives, and what we find ugly is that which would cause harm.
Okay, yeah, so that's a pretty traditional, good representation of the type of, I think, the best counter argument to this. I don't think it works, but before I get into, addressing your argument, I want to say you mentioned in Arkansas. So I'm from Arkansas, if you don't mind, and if you don't want to say it on live, that's completely fine. Like, what area of Arkansas are you from? Because I'm from kind of the northeast portion originally. I don't live there anymore.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, no, I live in Fayetteville.
Okay, dude, that's a beautiful area. Yeah, I went over there to
Right in
rock.
the Ozarks. Yeah, it's great.
All right, when I was in college. Okay, so yeah, so let me kind of work through some of the things you said here and kind of give you my I'll give you my off the cuff kind of responses to that. So there are a lot of things that we find beautiful that are advantageous for survival, but I don't think it's the case at all that we can kind of draw this clear, distinct connection between what we find beautiful and what we find advantageous for survival. So, for instance, we find deserts beautiful. My wife and I spent like 3 or 4 months living in the desert in a shack and just in the middle of the desert at a campground once, and it was not good for survival. Like that was a very bad place from a survival perspective. But it regularly, like, I found myself just struck by the beauty of it. We find the Antarctic beautiful. We find space. We find these galaxies and Saturn and things like that. We find that beautiful. But these are all things which are not only are they not beneficial to us to live there or be there. With something like space, that's not even something that would have been in our kind of evolutionary history for us to even experience. So I think that there's a problem between trying to draw this connection between what's beneficial for our survival and what isn't. Another thing that I would point out is I see issues in trying to any type of attempt to try to give an argument for experiencing something as beautiful is going to give us some type of evolutionary advantage. That just doesn't seem the case to me. So if I find the daffodil beautiful, or if I find the setting sun beautiful, that in and of itself doesn't provide me an evolutionary advantage. In fact, it may hurt me. It may, if I'm walking at night, I've been out hunting all day, right? And then I see the sun start to set, and then I see, oh, look, the sun is starting to set. This is pretty. I'm going to sit here and watch this. Just me having that aesthetic experience doesn't give me any survival value, and it may hurt me because then I just sit there and look at it, and now it's night, and panthers come out, and panthers can eat me or something like that. And then my kind of final thought, and then I'll throw it back to you because I don't want to like ramble on too much. Is I think a problem with this type of evolutionary explanation view is it conflicts with our intuitions, these kind of objectivist intuitions, and these intuitions that we have about beauty being something that's profound or significant in and of itself. So intuitively, in my experience, when I'm struck by the beauty of the natural world, like it just seems to me like there's something valuable in and of itself, like and it's profound in and of itself. But the view that you just offered, it degrades beauty. It says no, there's actually really nothing intrinsically, beautiful about this. This is just all from, an evolutionary perspective. This was just kind of, concocted to help us in some way. And so I think your view degrades beauty, and it doesn't do a good job of accounting for the intuitions that we have about, some things being objectively more, worth attributing beauty to than others. And this kind of just innate sense that I think we have that beauty is beautiful. So those are kind of some of the issues I think I have in that type of evolutionary response.
Yeah. I think it's a really good response. I also think that deserts are beautiful. I think that maybe my initial reaction to that is to say something along the lines of, when I see something beautiful that might not provide a survival advantage, it might in a kind of roundabout way, in that it provokes me to wonder, right? If I look at a sunset, I'm provoked to wonder. And being provoked to wonder means I'm provoked to wonder at, to wonder about, to investigate more. And I think that we tend to pursue things that we find beautiful, and we want to know more about them. And that process of discovery has helped us like a ton survive as a species. So that might be like a roundabout way that it could do so. I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
Yeah. So let me think about that for a second. So, as I'm not sure that I see the connection between having okay, beauty strikes us, and then it causes me to wonder. Well, my thought from an evolutionary perspective is, it seems like beauty isn't what's doing the heavy lifting there. It's the sense of wonder. So it seems like I could have this sense of wonder, I could have this sense of inquisitiveness without having the beauty. So it seems like beauty is just kind of what you would call epiphenomenal. It's just kind of is there, it rides on top, it doesn't really do anything. What's really giving me the benefit from a survival perspective is the wonder. But then I'm a little skeptical about being too quick to draw this line between wondering about something and doing maybe a type of like scientific investigation. And you didn't use the word scientific investigation, so if that's not what you were thinking about, forgive me. That's just kind of where my mind went. It seems to me that we can be provoked to investigation even apart from awe, even apart from, this type of wonder. And it seems that that's often the case. We often are provoked and intrigued, and it seems to be more curiosity than anything else. And curiosity can come about in the face of the ugly and the hideous just as much as the beautiful.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, I think that's good. If you believe that beauty is something that is intrinsic to God and that God puts in the world, do you then think that there is an objective standard for beauty in the same way that there's an objective standard for morality, I'm assuming, in your perspective?
Yeah, so I do tend to lean towards being an objectivist about beauty, and I think kind of God is, in a sense, kind of the standard of is kind of the beautiful. Like, I don't know if you know about Plato's idea of the good. Like, I think God is kind of the standard or the ultimate paradigm of the beautiful. Now, if it turns out that I'm wrong about beauty being objective, I don't think that would affect my argument too much. I think that I would still have a case to be made here. I would have to kind of alter how I phrase some things. But, excuse me, kind of my philosophical intuitions right now is that beauty is objective. And something I'll point out to those in the audience is there's actually a lot of atheist philosophers and agnostic philosophers who agree with this. So I did my undergrad in philosophy, and one of my professors, who's a thoroughgoing naturalist, it was really, charitable guy. He thought beauty was objective as well. He didn't believe in God. He wasn't on board with any of that, but he thought beauty was objective. And there have been several books written. One is called Real Beauty by Eddie Zimak, if I'm remembering his name correctly. He argues for an objectivist view about beauty. And if I remember correctly, he's also an atheist. So this isn't just some theist position. This is something that's kind of getting increasing, kind of growing ground in the philosophical community.
Yeah, okay. So in that case, then, do you have a personal standard for what you identify as beautiful? Like, do you think that contemporary art is as beautiful as classical art, or where do you draw that line? Like, how does that reflect the nature of God?
Yeah. So I think. Oh, I didn't know Thane was unmuting himself. Yeah, I don't have a. I don't have
myself.
Okay, yeah, gotcha. If you want to butt in, just let me know. Just yell over me if you want to butt in, Thane. Yeah, I don't.
I have one thing to say, but I'm just gonna wait because
You can go ahead and hop in. Well, I'll answer the question, and then
Yeah.
then Than can hop in. I don't know if you know Than, but he's a good guy. He is beautiful. Than is objectively beautiful. I don't know if you've ever
really
seen.
trash.
Sorry. Okay, so you're asking me about my standards about, I have preferences when it comes to various forms of art. So, I like Impressionism as a artistic movement more than I like something like like modernism, or some of the, what's the guy's name who just, I forget the name of the guy in the movement who he put a toilet on a stand, and he said, okay, this is art. Like I don't find that beautiful. I'm not as appreciative as that as a movement in art as something like impressionism. I like Degas and stuff like that. But I don't have like I don't have any type of hard and fast rules for saying which thing is more beautiful than the other. And so the way I think about this is, I'll give a kind of analogy with morality. There's not going to be able to draw a hard and fast line here. So with some things in morality, pretty much everyone agrees like some of these things are good. And there are some things in morality that almost everyone agrees that these things are bad. But then there are these kind of gray areas. So I'm still thinking of like, okay, maybe helping people, showing humility, you know, like helping poor people, like stuff like that. Helping to free the oppressed. Like these are things like we all are like, yeah, that seems pretty objectively good. And then there are other things like, I don't know, maybe like abusing a minor or something like that, abusing a minor in a sexual life. Like pretty much everyone's gonna be like, yeah, that's bad. And most people are gonna find both those things like objectively good or bad. Like one of those is objectively better than the other from a moral standpoint. But then there's all these kind of gray issues that people, if you get really kind of into the nitty gritty of some of this ethical literature, people kind of disagree on kind of like things in between that spectrum. And so I don't think that the fact that there's kind of disagreement about how we parse out these kind of gray issues on morality, I don't think that defeats our intuitions about the kind of far ends of the spectrum. And I feel the same way about beauty. I think that, you know, me and Than or me and you may disagree. Just had something pop up on my screen. We may have different intuitions about kind of along that spectrum with these gray areas. Is this more beautiful than that? But I don't think that detracts from my intuitions of thinking the mountain is more beautiful than the feces. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it really does. And I want to hear from Exploring Reality too, but I'll just give you my concluding idea here, which is really that just I'm not necessarily convinced after this brief conversation that there's not naturalistic explanations for things. But I think you put up a good argument. Yeah, I like it. I don't think I've actually heard someone put it forth before that beauty itself is evidence for God. At least I haven't experienced it personally. But yeah, so good stuff.
Before before Than hops in, I want to ask a quick question. So I'll say this also. So this argument I'm kind of running here is something I wrote up like between starting my grad and my doctoral degree. I wrote this up, and it just kind of sat on my files on my computer. And then I only recently dug it up again because I was like, oh, I already had this done, so I'm going to use this for one of my assignments. And that's kind of resparked my interest in it. And I was like, oh, I should just come on TikTok and see what other people think. And I'm kind of just playing with this, honestly. Like I think this has some bite to it, but I haven't ever gotten really the chance to have a lot of people argue back and forth with me on it. So I really appreciate like you coming up and giving me your thoughts, because like that's kind of what I'm here for. But the question I was going to ask you is, how do you feel? So, you know, we talked about, you know, whether or not we can find an evolutionary, you know, explanation for this. And so, you know, let's set aside for a second kind of these ideas we had about, you know, finding an evolutionary explanation. How do you feel about the suggestion that I made, which is that we kind of have these intuitions about that there's something like kind of profound and significant in beauty itself, and that my explanation is one which preserves those intuitions. And so maybe I could make an argument to you that says, hey, let's say hypothetically you and I were kind of at an impasse with this kind of evolutionary explanation of beauty and things like that. What if I said to you, okay, well, my explanation is better because mine preserves the kind of intrinsic, intuitive feelings we have about beauty when we experience it. And my view doesn't degrade beauty, whereas yours does. And so based on that, my view kind of has an upper hand. Well, what's your kind of gut feeling about something like that?
My gut feeling might be three things. Number one is that our intuitions can be wrong. Number two is that using the term degrading beauty, I might kind of be begging the question, because you're like assuming there already is an inherent value to beauty that can be degraded. And then I think that my last thought on the whole kind of argument is that I think I'm probably predisposed. I'm agnostic, right? So I don't make the assertions, but I'm kind of predisposed to think that there likely is something transcendent beyond purely the observable reality we live in. But I don't know if I think that beauty or goodness or anything like that necessarily corresponds to evidence for a specific being. Like my same problem with beauty in this case is my same problem with the idea of goodness. That if that's like the Euthyphro dilemma, but just apply it to beauty. So if God is beholden, if God makes things because they're beautiful, then there's something external to God that is this platonic idea of beauty. Or if things are beautiful just because God says they're beautiful, then I feel like it loses meaning personally.
And then I'll let Dan go ahead and hop in here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a few things. Just one concern that I might have is this idea that, well, okay. So the classical James and I are a little different because we're both not classical theists. If you're from in the models of God debate, so I can't speak for James here, but I'm willing to bet that James doesn't have a problem, and neither do I, with saying that there's some kind of objective source for beauty outside of God, and God just knows the true facts about beauty. If that makes sense, like,
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
so the classical theist or like the Thomist might have some issues with that, but like I'm a nominalist when it comes to abstractica, and like for instance, like if let's just talk about like moral realism
You're gonna have
just
to
as an
dial
analogy.
nominalist about abstractica for me.
Say what?
So you're gonna have to dial in what you mean by you're a
Oh,
nominalist.
I'm sorry. So you know what abstract objects are and like what Platonism is, right?
Yeah, got it.
Okay. So when I say I'm a nominalist, I'm just saying there's no like universal concrete particulars that ground these like these facts. That's all I'm saying to say. So like the Platonist might say like the number 2 has some sort of objective meaning, and that meaning is grounded in some kind of like abstract object. I'm open to that idea. I'm just saying I don't believe that. That's all. But I'm also not a person that will say like analogously, like for instance, a lot of theists will try to ground moral facts in God's nature. I'm totally fine with just saying there are some like true moral facts that exist independently of God, and God just knows these facts, and that's why He commands certain things and yada yada yada. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say there?
Yeah. If I'm understanding correctly, you're saying that basically you have an issue believing that morality or beauty, aesthetics are things that exist, quote unquote, external to God because they're these things that God knows about. Is that an accurate observation?
Yeah, and so this argument from beauty could still run if we don't want to ground these things in God's nature. That's just one thing I wanted to bring up. What do you think about that?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, honestly, I would need probably more time to think about it and consider it. I think that I'm tracking with you, whereas that feels like it goes against the general kind of omni-God idea that most theists are talking about. And so arguing for that form of God feels like it's arguing for a less omnipotent form of God, which personally I'm okay with. But yeah, I just have to think about it more.
No, I love that answer so much. So I love it. James, did you have any thoughts on what I like? I have 2 other points I wanted to make, but did you have any thoughts on what I just said?
No, I mean, so I'm curious, Dan, excuse me, I'm sorry. Do you tend to then, do you kind of take like a almost like realist, do you lean towards a realist approach with abstracta and
Yeah. Okay. So this is gonna go down a rabbit hole.
this could, and we don't have to go down this at this point.
Yeah. I'll just like briefly outline my metaphysics.
Tell you what, let's do this. Why don't you make your other 2 points, and then me and you we can talk about that later. I don't want to get
fine. That's totally fine. I'll just say this: I'm what you would call like a relaxed realist about some of these things. And so basically, if you know about like the correspondence theory of truth, I take a modified approach to it, and I think there are certain types of truths that just they don't have some kind of concrete grounding. They're just part of the fabric of reality, and that's it. But we can talk offline about that if you want. And same with you, David. If you ever want to talk about that kind of stuff, just hit me up.
I was. Oh, did you? Oh, sorry. Was
No,
that your? I was gonna. Did you make your other 2 points that you were gonna talk
I
about?
forgot what the second point was. I have one more point. Maybe the second one will come back though. The other thing I just wanted to say is, I'm not too sure that trying to use. Oh, actually, not now. I reminded myself. Okay, so one thing that you said was, David, was that you're not sure that there's no way the naturalist can account for these these data points. And my concern there is, were you going to say something?
I wasn't, but
Sorry.
yeah, here we go.
So my concern with that kind of a response is, well, and James might be a little bit different than I am here, but like when I argue, my whole entire methodology when it comes to arguing for any hypothesis at all is I'm a Bayesian, and so I'm actually totally happy acknowledging that the naturalist can account for these data points. What I want to say is that the theist has better explanatory resources for this, such that it renders the data more expected. And I think the theist can posit an explanation in a simpler way than the naturalist could.
Mm-hmm.
Which
Yeah.
I think, which ties in with the other thing I want to say, but I'll take a step back for a second to see what you think.
Yeah, I have got mixed feelings about explanatory power, because I feel like I could concoct some sort of explanation for the universe that explained every single possible, I don't know if I could, someone could, come up with an explanation that explained every single possible phenomenon perfectly, and it still be ungrounded from what was actually true. And
Oh, yeah,
so I
totally.
don't know if the power of something to explain things is necessarily evidence that it's accurately explaining things. And I want to be careful and not go like be the naturalist of the gaps type of guy. But I do think that trajectory wise, things that we tend to think are unexplainable and we need God to explain, we do tend to find out later down the road that nature can explain a lot of those things. And so kind of like in an inductive way, I would think that naturalism with the gaps is a little bit more defensible than God of the gaps, if that makes sense.
No, you're totally fine. Yeah. So what I let me. So I also just one thing I'd try. That's like nagging at me is that I just want to correct real quick. Is I wouldn't take what you're saying as a naturalism as a gaps any more than what we're saying as a God of the gaps, because we're not just blindly inserting God into a gap of knowledge. We're positing God as a hypothesis to explain the data. The other thing is, I'm with you, right? We don't want to just be able to come up with any given hypothesis and all of a sudden be like, oh, hey, by the way, like this is the best one. Like theoretically speaking, I could say something along the lines of like, look, secretly there's these fundamental aliens to reality, and they love beautiful things, and they also love making people look at ugly things because they want the people to appreciate the beauty, right? Like that theoretically could somehow like make sense of the data. And that's why I'm saying simplicity is also a really important factor, because for the theist, we're only positing one entity with, at least by my model of God, one property, and God holds that in the simplest way with no arbitrary limits. Whereas I think the naturalist will have to assume some sort of fundamental laws as brute facts on their naturalistic account, as well as some other things. Because I think the argument from beauty, once you kick the can back enough, you get to the fine-tuning argument pretty much. Yes, you smiling, James. Do you disagree or agree?
I think arguments from beauty are kind of like, at least how I present them, are like this kind of weird combination of like a teleological argument and like a value argument. So it's like if you take like a fine tuning argument and you take like a moral argument and you make them kiss, like the baby's like
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I kind of get, yeah, it's kind of playfully, in there. One of the things I wanted to comment on that you said, David, I mean, it seems like anytime we are taking a set of data and then trying to and kind of create an explanation for that data, it's always the case that our best explanations may be wrong. So in the philosophy of science, there's an idea of the inference to the best explanation, and an objection against an inference to the best explanation is that okay, what if it's just the best of a bad lot? Like this is the best of the bad lot kind of argument. But it seems to me like inference to the best explanation is the best we have, and it seems to me like kind of one of the key guiding principles of when we have some set of data that needs to be explained is to draw on our experience and says, okay, in our experience, what type of things do cause this type of data, cause this type of data. So if I'm going through, let's say, like the geographic, or not geo, the kind of the what's it called, the geological record, right? I'm looking at all these strata of different types of dirt and things like that, and I see there's this level of like volcanic ash or something that's just like shows up, and I say, okay, what's the explanation for that? I was like, okay, well, I know that volcanoes, can cause this type of thing. I know in my everyday experience that is a cause that can bring this about. Like I can infer based on the agents or the entities that I know can bring about this effect. I can use that when positing an explanation. And I think with beauty, I'm doing something quite similar. I'm saying, okay, well, I've got this kind of stuff to explain. I have this kind of, things causing me beauty in the natural world. And I'm thinking, okay, what are some agents or some causes which I know can bring that about, like, or at least offer explanations for this phenomena in my everyday life. And I say, okay, well, artistic intent by an agent is something which explains this quite often. It is capable of bringing this up. So it's not something completely ungrounded. Like I'm drawing on the experience I have of the world and with other people and agents, and I'm saying, okay, like I see how this explains this, in other areas, and so I'm drawing on that to kind of do it on a macro level with beauty in the natural world.
Okay, yeah, no, I totally understand that. Here, let me clarify my thoughts for just a second in my head. But yeah, you probably level the same thing against me, is what I'm about to say to you, which is that I think that this is how you get into the weeds, right, with all these conversations, is because I think that, okay, look at beauty and you go, okay, in the world, we know that oftentimes beautiful things are the results of conscious agents intending to create beautiful things. And saying that what we observe is beautiful in the natural world, let's also conjecture that there's a conscious agent who intended to make beauty. And I think that has a ton of explanatory power in that one sphere. But if we go back to like the volcanic thing, and I've got no experience in geology or volcanics, so forgive this if it's a bad analogy, but like if we observe one layer of volcanic ash, then yeah, maybe the inference to the best or whatever that was, like the best possible explanation is that, well, yeah, a volcano exploded and that's why we have volcanic ash there. But then if we have somebody else go in and go, actually, you know what though, look at all these magma flows. This doesn't actually make sense. Like there's no record of earthquakes that would have caused a volcanic eruption at this time. There's no stories in the area that have legends about a volcano erupting around that time. So in isolation, that was the best explanation for that one thing. But when you factor in other things, it doesn't seem to have the same level of depth. And I think that that's probably the way that I tend to look at God in this scenario. Maybe God is the best explanation for beauty, but then you bring in, I'm not going to go down this road, but like you bring in like problem of evil and all this other stuff. And my biggest problem with arguments for God is that they lack specificity. And so I've got a hard time making any sort of jump to Christianity. And so in isolation, yeah, maybe, but I fail to see it applying equally in other areas.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I actually totally love what you're saying. If you've ever read Paul Draper, like this falls in line with what Draper calls the problem of understated evidence. Both atheist and theist. Draper is an agnostic philosopher, for those that don't know. Draper, like both theists and atheists, point to specific datum and say, "Hey, this data is evidence for God's existence. Therefore, God probably exists." And I'm in agreement with that. Like and I think with you, because it sounds like what you're saying is like, well, we should look at the totality of the data and just ask a simple question. Is this the kind of universe we would expect given some kind of like maximally good God or maximal being this, like what's behind all of reality itself?
Right.
Yeah. And I'm totally for that. And I think that's where you really get into the weeds, because hot take, right? Like I actually think the disbursement and types of suffering we see in the world are actually expected on theism.
Very hot take.
Yeah. And we don't like, I don't know if we have the time for me to get into all of that, but like, I think you would at least, I don't know if you're familiar enough with me, but like James knows me well enough to know that I have a very, very like laid out, epistemically structured way of arguing for that.
Yeah, so without getting too, maybe we can circle back to that second. So I wanted to make a comment about two things that David said. One is with you gave an idea in the analogy of the geological record thing, of something along the lines of like, okay, well, if there was a volcanic eruption, there should be this other evidence. and we don't have that evidence. So like that kind of undercut that could potentially in that type of scenario um, undercut the volcanic eruption as an explanation or something. And I agree. So if there is if I posit an explanation and then you say, hey, listen, if your explanation is the case, it's really likely we would see X, Y, Z, but yet we don't see X, Y, Z. That would be important, and that could potentially undercut my argument. However, with the case with beauty, I don't think there's anything comparable to that. I'm not sure what it is regarding beauty in the natural world that if I posit a cosmic artist, I should be expecting to see X, Y, Z, and I don't see it, or vice versa. And then I completely agree, like with what you were saying and what Than was saying, of like, I think that we have to look at all of the data. And for me, I think that the explanation that I give for beauty in the natural world, that's the same explanation that I give for why there are hundreds of millions of people who report experiences of the supernatural, and why there are millions of people who report, praying and having a serious medical illness healed or something like that. And that's the same explanation for why we see the universe structured according to these kind of mathematical laws. And if they were altered even slightly, we wouldn't be able to have life. We see the universe fine-tuned for life. So for me, my explanation for beauty is the same as my explanation for the widespread belief in the supernatural and for miracles and all that, and that's the same as the explanation for the fine tuning of the universe, which is the same. And so I can kind of go to these different areas, and so I'm positing one explanation that seems to me to have great explanatory power, whereas from a naturalist perspective, it seems like you kind of have to concoct an explanation for something like beauty, and then you have to give me a different explanation for fine tuning, and you have to give me a different explanation for something like widespread belief in the supernatural, and testimony about miracles and stuff like that. So I agree that we need something that is the best explanation for all the data. I just think theism is that best explanation, and I will admit that up to this point we've only been talking about beauty because that's what I provocatively put at the top. I was like kind of nailing down on that, but I think theism is gonna win that game, so to speak. And I do agree with Than. Like I've told Than before, like my understanding of like God and the cosmos and things like that is suffering and evil that we see, that fits in perfectly to my model. Like that almost offers some type of increased probability for how I view how a God has structured the cosmos, because I bring in kind of divine council stuff. So yeah, I'm not too plussed about that, but I'll let you weigh in here, David.
Yeah, I think that I'm nearing the moment where I gotta get on and scram. I'll have to save. Hopefully, I can come up some other time, and then we can go into the why evil is positive evidence for
Yeah,
it.
let's get in the weeds.
I would love to have that conversation, but for now, I do got to get going. But hey, my final thoughts are basically that I think you did a good job presenting the case for beauty as evidence for God. And so yeah, I was happy
I
to
mean,
engage
look
with
at
you,
him.
and
He's beautiful.
hopefully, I gave you just enough pushback to refine your work a little bit more.
Yeah, I really like this was really helpful. I'm really glad you came up. It was super nice to meet you. Nice to meet a fellow Arkansan. Don't get to do that every day. Yeah, I'm really glad you
I'm a
came.
new Arkansan, to be fair. I've only been here for a year, but I do enjoy it.
Okay, thanks. So you enjoy it though. Where'd you come to? I know you have to go. Where'd you come from before Arkansas?
Hey, that's a long story, but I'm originally from Seattle. I was a missionary, yeah, for 8 years in Mexico, and then
That's the cliffhanger, everybody. That's the. I was a missionary. Bye.
yeah, you know what? That's a good spot. So yeah, hey, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Hit me up anytime,
I'll let
David.
the rest of y'all take it from here.
I do take it
Catch you later,
easy.
bro. Thanks.
All right, I saw some other people were requesting to come up in the chat. Let's see. We've got Josh Winkley, and let's bring you up.
Hey, real quick. I'm actually gonna hop off here. I was only able to come up for a little bit. My kids are gonna wake up here, and then I gotta be a father.
Being a dad. No, I'm glad you came up. It was fun.
Later, bro.
What's up?
And people are saying we should do this more often, and we will.
We will. When Than puts his kids up for adoption. Or are they stopping around? I'm kidding. What's up, Josh? How's it going?
Hey, you're from Arkansas?
Originally, yeah.
What part of Arkansas?
Like northeast area.
I'm from Northeast Arkansas. I'm from the Ozarks. I'm from Ravenden, Arkansas. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Yeah, dude, I've been to Ravenden. Small town. Yeah,
Oh
I.
yeah, you've seen the giant blackbird then.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've
Yeah.
driven through it. Yeah, I've driven through it a couple times. Yeah, that's man. It's a small world. Internet's a small world.
Yeah, yeah, we used to go up to Hardy all the time to go up to the river up there and float down the river.
I used to go to like Horseshoe Canyon Ranch and stuff like that to rock climb when I was in college, like that area.
Hell yeah, yeah, yeah. We used to, yeah, we'd go to like Bull Shoals, um, Norfolk, all that up there. So, hell yeah, man, that's cool. Um,
Fine.
sorry, I didn't hear you. What'd you say?
So what's on your mind? And I saw somebody asking when the debate with Dillahunty and Than is. That's Good Friday, just for who I was asking it. But yeah, what's on your mind, Josh? What you thinking about all
Well,
this?
I'm an atheist, so obviously I don't think beauty is evidence of God or uh, objective. I mean, I think there are certain things that the majority of people find beautiful, and we can say basically at that point that they're objectively beautiful. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, the majority of beauty is, like they say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's subjective. Just like like people loving each other isn't evidence for God. It's sort of at the surface level, saying something subjective is evidence for something else that's basically subjective is just an if then logical fallacy. You know what I'm saying? On the surface, it's if beauty exists in this way, then God exists. You know what I'm saying? It's not really evidence, I would say, but I think the argument whether or not beauty is mostly subjective or objective is probably more productive.
Yeah, so I actually don't think my argument depends upon beauty being objective or subjective. So I could grant and say, okay, there's nothing objective about beauty. And then here's how I could kind of rephrase this. I could say, okay, listen, usually things which are not the result of artistic intent are not things that we respond to by attributing beauty to them. If I say something like that, I haven't assumed any type of objectivity with beauty, and I can say, okay, well, usually that's the case, and so usually if I see something that's beautiful, I usually almost always find behind that artistic intent, and then I come across the natural world, and I say, well, the natural world sure does seem to kind of be provoking me to attribute beauty to it. I kind of find myself just intentionally attributing beauty to it. It seems like I can argue in a similar way without ever even getting into the kind of objectivity of beauty or not. And here's what's interesting, and I'll say this, and I'll let you chime in. Is so there have been some studies done about kind of like how do we intuitively view things in nature, and pretty much everybody, including atheists, have the intuition when they look at beauty that it's something that comes about from teleology. Like there's some teleology behind it. Like it's kind of the result of an agent or something along those lines. There have been some. I talked about it in one of my past videos. There have been some studies where essentially they have this kind of test that sociologists cook up where they present a bunch of images and say, okay, do you think this was the result of an agent, or do you think there's teleology behind it, or something like that? And they have to respond very quickly, so people don't have the chance to censor themselves. I'm sorry. They don't have their chance to kind of censor their thoughts. They just have to give their kind of like their gut reactions. And even when you take that test and you apply it to like the most like people who are involved in like atheist organizations like Atheists of America and stuff, it's still the case that they tend to intuitively find these things to be teleological, or there to be teleology behind this. And so I think that the kind of idea that I'm drawing on here, which is like, hey, we just kind of like constantly find ourselves like invoked to call this thing beautiful and cosmic art and stuff. It seems like what I'm saying is pretty in line with how people generally experience the world.
Well, yeah, yeah. Well, you're making a lot of generalizations, though. You know what I'm saying? Not everyone finds nature beautiful. Not everyone finds looking at the same parts of nature enjoyable. You know what I'm saying? Like some people may enjoy mountains, some people may enjoy forests, some people may enjoy deserts. Things like that. So, uh,
There's a difference between preferences and finding things beautiful. I find beaches preferable. I find mountains preferable to deserts. I've been in both. I still find deserts beautiful. And when you look at humans, pretty much everyone finds nature beautiful. Like that's an extremely widespread thing. And so I can also say, like, do you find nature beautiful? Because kind of for this argument to work, all I needed to be the case is that the person I'm talking to, you, like, do you find the natural world beautiful? Like when you walk out and you see something like this, do you be like, oh man, that's really beautiful, like really sublime? Like, and if so, then I'm off to the races, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. I just I like yeah, like obviously I find things in nature beautiful, you know what I'm saying? But like for instance like snow, like a lot of people love snow. I fucking hate snow, you know what I'm saying? Like I don't like snow at all. But like I can like admit that like whenever like it first snows and it's not disturbed, like it looks like kind of like serene, you know what I'm saying? But I'm not like, "Oh, wow, snow, that's amazing." You know what I'm saying? But um yeah, basically the point that I was leading into is just to say that like um even though yeah like yeah the things that we find beautiful that are like created by people to be beautiful and attractive to people, just because they're created by something doesn't mean that everything that we observe that we consider beautiful is created to be beautiful or was created in general.
So then, do you not find like inductive reasoning to be a valid form of inference?
um uh I think inductive reasoning can have um strength in inference, but I don't think it's a reliable way to lead to truth or even evidence.
Okay, so you think the scientific method has no value. It can't lead us to truth. It can't lead us to evidence.
Yeah, yeah, the scientific method for sure.
But the scientific method uses inductive reasoning, so you're not on board with that either.
Well, it's not just inductive reasoning and that's it though, right?
I mean, there's
It's
logic and math and things like that, but
yeah.
when it comes to the physical world, it's kind of this idea of doing tests, doing laboratory experiments, and seeing what usually happens when we have certain parameters, and then changing a parameter and saying, okay, well now this happened. Like that's inductive reasoning, and that's seems to be the same thing that I'm doing. I'm saying, okay, let's look at what's usually the case when I'm seeing something that has artistic intent, or something that causes me to think it's beautiful, it provokes me to attributing beauty to it. It's like, okay, I see that's usually the case, that it has artistic intent. And I say, okay, let's remove artistic intent from the kind of the lab equation and say, okay, well, when artistic intent isn't there, things rarely turn out beautiful. So it seems like I'm the type of inductive reasoning that I'm using is pretty par for the course with how we might do something in a laboratory. Now, obviously, this isn't science; this is philosophy. But the kind of inductive inferences that I'm making do seem comparable. So if you're on board with that kind of reasoning in science, which it seems like you are, it seems like you should be kind of on board with this type of inductive reasoning here.
No, just because usually in science, like you said, we're not just using inductive reasoning, right? There's always looking at all aspects, all of the contexts that affect whatever subject you're observing, right? So, and there's plenty of reason to believe that artistic design has nothing to do with beauty, actually, because before there was artistic design, right, the world existed, people existed, and we documented our surroundings using art, what we call art today, right? Like pictures of animals and trees and things like that. So, beauty as we know it is obviously subjective to human beings. Like animals participate in rituals that are based on differences in appearance, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're observing beauty the way that we do. You know what I'm saying? Like animals.
Let's go back a bit there. I'm not sure I understood your argument. So you can experience the world without the experience that you're having being beauty. So I live in a concrete box. You can't see it because this is more nice, but I live in a concrete box. It's not beautiful, but I'm still having perceptions about my environment here. So is what you're suggesting is that before, where I got confused with your statement along the lines of before artistic intent, because then you went ahead and you said, well, like even from the beginning, we've had people doing art. So I kind of got lost there. Can you go back to,
Beauty is subjective to human beings. So
okay, but now
if
I've
we
already
didn't,
said that
if we didn't,
beauty is subjective. That doesn't affect my argument, remember?
right? No, no, no. But I'm making a point based on the subjectiveness of beauty. So, like, because if an artist, basically like a god or whatever,
created the world intending for it to be beautiful. That just suggests that either he made things objectively beautiful regardless of human observation, or it suggests that he made them intentionally beautiful to human beings, and therefore the world was created for human beings. And those it just, I guess it depends on which option better fits like what your point is. But either way, it leaves a lot of evidence, or I guess options to the contrary of it being artistic intent, basically. You know what I'm saying? For instance, like if beauty is just objective and it doesn't require human beings to observe it, well, then you'd expect to see animals.
Why would I expect to see animals making art if beauty was objective? Which again, beauty being objective isn't part of my argument.
Well, I didn't say making art, but like you would see behaviors in animals that could be contributed or attributed to them appreciating and observing beauty for just the experience of, recognizing or observing or even replicating beauty for that purpose. So that would be what you would see in like an objectively beautiful world absent of human beings. Now, a world that was
Let's pause there. I want to work with that a bit. So if the world was objectively beautiful, we would expect to see animals also kind of experiencing that objective beauty. Is that a pretty good representation of your argument?
Well, not just that, there would also be like, there would be, I guess, there wouldn't be natural explanations for why these things that we see as beautiful exist. You know what I'm saying? It would just be like, well, they exist and they're beautiful. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what it makes it sound like. Like there's like, if you find a mountain beautiful, like there's a very complex and
Switching arguments. Let's stick with the one that you're going with, right? Because it seemed like before you were saying, okay, it seemed like you were presenting an argument to me about like, hey, listen, Garb, if you think that beauty is objective, you got this problem. We should be expecting to see these things with animals, and we just don't see those. Like that seemed to be the argument you were going with originally. And then when I was like, okay, let's park on that and clarify that a little bit, you then seem to be like, okay, well, listen, I can explain these things other way. Well, that's completely different. Like whether or not you can explain things, another way, it's completely different to whether or not I, as someone who thinks there's objective beauty in the world, whether or not I have a problem with these, animals not experiencing it. So tell you what, let's concentrate.
It's all part of the same. It's all part of the same argument, right? Like nature. If I'm saying if you believe that like nature is objectively beautiful and God made things to be objectively beautiful, there would be all of the evidence of these things existing would point to that truth, even if they had functions outside of that evidence. Like you wouldn't, you know what I'm saying? So like the fact that there's a more accurate, more complex explanation for the origin of these things proves to be more accurate than just beauty.
So we've got two different explanations, right? So if we have two explanations of the world, it could be the case that one explanation is better than the other. Either it's better at explaining the data, it explains more of the data, it explains the data stronger, it's simpler, less ad hoc, whatever. So like we have these kind of theoretical virtues that we can use to kind of evaluate explanations. So one thing you could say is you could say to me, hey Garb, you have your explanation, but my explanation is just as good. I've got just as good as explanation as you do. But the thing I want to go back to is you're saying that there's like an intrinsic problem with my explanation, which is that if my explanation is true, I should be seeing some data which I'm not seeing. So I want to address that, and then we can go on to, does your explanation actually account for the data as well? So you're the thing that you're saying my explanation was going to have problem accounting for was animals, doing things that show they appreciate beauty or something like that. So I have two thoughts on that. One, I don't have any reason to think that animals don't experience beauty. I mean, like, I don't know what it's like to be a dog. Like, there's this famous paper in philosophy of mind called What It's Like to Be a Bat. It's by Thomas Nagel. And his idea is, like, I can kind of close my eyes and think about what it might be like for me to act like a bat. I can think about, me, like, flapping my wings and flying around at night. But I'll never really know what it's like to be a bat. We can look at kind of like brain structures and the behavior of these animals. But at the end of the day, like I just don't know whether or not animals experience beauty or not. I mean, I think there are some animals who they kind of seem like they experience beauty. I mean, animals like crows and dolphins are like really intelligent. It would really surprise me if they didn't have some type of like aesthetic, some type of aesthetic evaluation going on. So if you're gonna say, hey, listen, animals don't experience beauty, I'm gonna be like, okay, I don't see any reason to think why that's the case. But then let's suppose I grant this and I said, okay, like animals don't experience beauty. Like it's not clear to me why if I thought the natural world was subjectively beautiful, why would I expect every living thing to be able to recognize that beauty? I could hold it to the position that the beauty in the natural world is something that takes a certain level of cognitive function to come to recognize and have experience of, and that humans are just us and maybe a few of these other higher order animals. We just happen to be the ones who have that level of higher order cognitive function. So it doesn't bother me that a dog doesn't experience beauty any more than it doesn't bother me that E. coli doesn't experience beauty. So whether or not animals experience these things doesn't seem to make a whole lot of difference. But then let's go to this idea that you can
So
explain.
you're leaning more towards like it's beauty is subjective to human beings then. It's not, you know what I'm saying? Like objective means regardless of us observing it, it's going to be that thing, right? So if God created objective beauty, right, how would you see evidence for beauty outside of humans existing? That's what I'm talking about. Like what function? So either you that's what I was saying, either you think that God made things objectively beautiful to be beautiful, or you believe that God created beauty to be subjective to human beings, to serve human beings.
So I could hold it the position that God created things that are objectively beautiful. Like he is an artist who wants to make beautiful things, as most artists do. And one of the reasons he wanted to make beautiful art was because he wanted his creatures, us, his image bearers, to kind of get a glimpse of him through that art. He maybe wants us to enjoy the creation that he's made for us, right? He wants us to have a good home. He wants us to kind of, come to know him through what we can see of him in the natural world. So I can say all of that, and none of that undercuts my reasons for thinking that beauty is objective. And let me ask you something real quick. I don't know if you were in here earlier when I kind of gave this a thought experiment of like if we're standing at the top of a mountain after a long day's hike and we're looking at, I don't know, it's like something like this as the sun is setting, and you say, oh man, like that's really beautiful, and I say, no, that's not beautiful. This pile of feces, this is what's beautiful. Like this is it. It's like got like maggots and stuff like crawling in it, and it's really stinky. And I take a picture of it, I save it as my phone wallpaper, I send it to my mom, whatever. I'm like, this is it. Do you really think that like both of us are equally valid in our judgments there? Like, doesn't it strike you that no one of us is like mistaken? Like it is like really obvious to me. Like one of us is just wrong in our evaluations of things, and it doesn't matter if like everyone in the world was like, oh yeah, like the feces is it. I'd be like, you guys are all bonkers. Like, you know what I mean? Like it seems really obvious to me. Like one of these things is objectively more worthy of having beauty ascribed to it than the other. Do you not share that intuition? Just like here, I'm just asking about the intuition, regardless of what implications we draw from that. Like, do you at least share that?
That's just a you know what I'm saying, that's the average person is going to find you know what I'm saying, because you're just picking two things in your subjective experience that seem obvious based on popular opinion. So it's just an appeal to popularity, right? But if you use but if let me go back. If we were on the mountain and I was like, man, isn't this beautiful? And I took a picture and sent it to my family, and you took a picture of some shit with some maggots in it, and you're like, let me send a picture to my family, I would I wouldn't say you're lying, you don't think that's beautiful. You know what I'm saying? Because like the behavior that suggests that you do actually find it beautiful is there. So I'd be like, okay, that's cool, man. That's what you find beautiful. That's cool. That's because beauty is subjective. It's the same thing with like anything.
So you don't get the intuition that like I'm just wrong in calling that beautiful?
No, because that's not, beauty is subjective. I truly believe
That's
beauty
so
is
like set
subjective.
aside beauty is subjective. Like set aside that like you have that in your mind. I'm just asking intuitively, gutly. Like a person who looks at the feces and says this is more beautiful than the mountain, like that is to me as objectively wrong. Like just intuitively, like my
Yeah,
gut
to
reaction.
you, that's objectively wrong. As someone who doesn't agree with that, you set up a model that fits your worldview, and then you're see, look how crazy it would be if I didn't think how I think. That's all you're saying.
I,
That
I'm just
doesn't show objectiveness.
No, but so we use intuition. So like, let me ask this: do you think that if somebody, let's say somebody was,
Yeah, well, most people have the intuition to not like poop because it can spread diseases and parasites and things like that. It's
but
not
that's not.
because of its beauty factor. It's because of the factors that it affects our bodies in a certain way when we interact with it in a way that we shouldn't. But if somebody said to me, you know, like if someone took a picture of poop and was like, "This is beautiful," I'd be like, obviously, I'd be like, "Huh?" But then if they explain it in a way like, poop is always looked at as such a stinky bad thing, but like it's just as much a part of life and a part of our survival as drinking and eating water, and people are eating water, drinking water and eating, good food, healthy food, and everyone enjoys that. Well, poop is just unavoidable byproduct of survival and of the beauty that we participate in willingly, which is eating, right? That we don't really have a choice to eat, but we can choose to eat good things or bad things, right? So if someone wants to appreciate the part of nature and the necessity of poop and how it's actually a
No, we have
good
to take
thing,
this one at a time, okay? Because
that's
what you just gave is an argument for thinking that poop serves a function. You can tell me all day poop serves a function. It's not going to make me think it's beautiful. I think spiders serve an essential function in the ecosystem. I think they're ugly. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you show me a tarantula, I'm going to be like, screw
some
that.
people think
I'll try
spiders
not
are
to do this on
beautiful.
screen.
Some
Like, that's
people do think spiders are beautiful.
yeah. And so we have a difference there, and we can. I mean, I think maybe there are some aspects of spiders that are beautiful, but like if you show me like just a tarantula and just say aesthetically, like maybe like a really ugly one. I've seen cute spiders. Like I'm just kind of making a broad generalization here. I've seen cute spiders, but if you show me like something like a really ugly beetle, is like I think that has a function in the ecosystem, and I can tell you like it has value and like letting it live. That's not an argument for it being beautiful. And so like my argument is just I think that
You don't think functionality can I guess provide a sense of beauty?
I think it can if we're talking about if we're looking at the function and not at the aesthetics. But here we're talking about
I mean,
visually.
beauty is just an appreciation of.
I don't think it is. I think I can think something's beautiful and not really enjoy it or appreciate it. I can, and so in fact I've done this. I was at a time where I was traveling with my wife, and I was traveling with my wife, and we saw like a bunch of national parks in a really short amount of time, and I remember by the end of it, I was so tired. I was like, I know what's standing in front. I know what I'm looking at is beautiful. Like it's obviously beautiful, but I just don't get any enjoyment out of this. Like I was so tired, I got no pleasure from it. And so here's the thing: it's like you seem so like what I want to talk about is let's just talk about this idea that beauty is subjective because I want you. I want because you're importing that as an assumption, and what I'm trying to point out is intuitively none of us act like that. None of us intuitively really think some of these things are objective. Like the fact that you think like I'm kind of bonkers when I take a picture of the feces is because you recognize like no that doesn't deserve to be called beautiful like the valley does. And so there's also kind of like
That's
another.
not why I would say that. I would say it's because it's stinky poop, not because it doesn't deserve to be called beautiful. I personally hold the opinion that
So
poop
if I
isn't
give you a
that
picture,
interesting to me.
so if I give you a picture of poop and I put that picture next to, something like this, so you don't have to worry about the smell, you don't have to worry about getting disease from it. You're really gonna tell me that you're like, oh yeah, it is equally valid to say one of these is beautiful and the other. This is just, just a matter of opinion. Like, really?
Yeah, that's the whole point of beauty.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
it's
I
just
think
like,
most people listening to this know, like, no, that's nonsense. Like, one of those things is really more beautiful
well,
than the other.
let's
Drawing on that intuition. And you were
let's
just
change
saying,
the subjects of the argument then. Okay, say I have like a skinny 5'3" wife who works out all the time, who has a nice round ass, nice boobs, and then
oh,
I
be
put.
careful of the language because I don't want to get TikTok
Oh,
to flag
okay.
this. Like, I'm fine with your
All right.
example. Just be careful because
Yeah.
TikTok is really,
So
really.
let's see, so let's say that's my wife, and someone else has a wife who is 6 foot, doesn't have what is considered naturally beautiful features, or maybe be more disproportionate in some ways, something of that nature. For me to say, well, my woman is objectively more beautiful because I'm not attracted to your wife, is just objectively wrong because beauty is subjective. So
okay, let's go
so
back.
if
Okay,
someone
I like this.
if someone actually says, I think this pile of poop is just as beautiful as this mountain, I'm gonna go, well, they're both just biological clumps of matter. So I mean that makes sense.
When you said it's objectively wrong, did you mean that in a moral sense or just in like a factual sense?
Yeah, trying to I guess say that one person is more beautiful than another person is objectively wrong.
Okay, like from a moral perspective, like it's wrong morally to say something like that.
It's just wrong.
Okay,
Because
yeah, but when I'm asking, are you saying it's
beauty is
incorrect?
subjective. Yeah, it's you
Okay,
can't come to um, an objective decision or an objective truth based on subjective evidence.
wait. But wait. Okay, so then you don't have beliefs about anything then, because all of the evidence you have is to some degree it's all filtered through your experiences, which are inherently subjective. Anything you point to and say, "Oh, that supports my belief," that is a subjective experience that you're having, even either coming through your eyesight or your ears or your touch. Everything is to some degree subjective to you.
Well, for the most part, yeah. Other than, I mean, that's why I don't really have any beliefs in anything. I don't really believe any. I don't have faith in anything. You know what I'm saying? So for the most part,
The phone in front of you exists?
huh?
You don't think the phone in front of you exists?
Of course, I think the phone in front of me exists. I'm using it to
Based on
communicate
what? But how do you know it exists?
because I'm
Because you
holding
have
it in my hand.
experience of it. Okay, so you have experience of it, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you
So we can't
experience
experience like, um.
I experience beauty just like you experience the phone in your hand.
No, you don't though because
Look at that. Look at how beautiful that is. Like that's it's just as obvious to me that that's beautiful it is that you're
and I
holding the
think it's
phone.
ugly. So prove it's beautiful.
Do you really think it's ugly?
Yeah.
See, I don't think you actually do. And if you do, I think you should see a psychologist. Honestly, if you think that's ugly, like go
You know
talk to
what
a
a psychologist would tell me if I told him I think mountains are ugly?
They would probably say you're like chronically depressed or something like that. Like that's not an aspect of a healthy human being.
Yeah, they'd be like, that's fine. Beauty is subjective. You don't have to like everything everyone likes. That's part of being a healthy human being.
Seen a psychologist? Like go to a psychologist and tell him you walk out and you see beautiful mountains and you just think they're ugly. Like I don't think that's the response. I think that's gonna be pretty. That's gonna throw up some red
No,
flags.
see, if you said it that way, if you said I go out and I see beautiful mountain ranges and all I feel is like despair or something like that, well then they're going to see the dichotomy of you observing something that is in your opinion beautiful, but then also having a negative reaction to it. That's a different thing. If I just told a psychologist, yeah, we went to the mountains with my family this year and I don't know, everyone thought they were really beautiful. I didn't really care for them. I didn't think they were that great. I thought it was just, big rocks. And they're like, well, they are just big rocks. Sounds like you have a realist perception of the world around you. That's not an issue for your mental health.
So let me ask you a question. So do you think there's any objectivity when it comes to moral values? Like do you think it's objectively wrong to sexually assault a child?
Do I think it's objectively wrong?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's wrong. Yeah.
This should be an easy answer just for the audience here. Like, if anyone ever asks you, is it objectively wrong to sexually assault a child? Like, this is like me throwing out a soft pitch or something like that. Like, this should be just knock this out of the park. Like, the correct answer here should be yes, it is objectively wrong to sexually assault a child. Are you not willing to say it's objectively wrong to sexually assault a child?
Yeah, no, I think it's wrong to assault a child, obviously, yeah.
But I'm not asking, do you just think it's wrong? Like, I'm asking, are you saying that's wrong regardless of what anybody else's view is? So, like, if I had another guest who came up and he's like, nope, it's fine, it's not an issue. Or is your opinion and his opinion, are they equally valid?
No.
But wait a second. How is it? Well, why not?
Well, because we can prove the harm that assaulting a child can cause.
Wait, so you're saying you can prove the harm, but that's assuming that harming a child is objectively morally wrong. What if the other guy says, well, like, okay, like, I don't think, my intuition is I don't think it's objectively wrong to harm a child. What is your evidence then? What are you going to point to bolster your claim that it's objectively morally wrong to harm a child? Is it just your intuition?
Because we've proved, no, it's not my intuition. It's because there's a lot of reasons why it's objectively wrong to assault a child. Is one, children can't consent. Two, it's physically wrong for children. What?
You're not getting the point. Any reason you give, I'm going to say, okay, why is that objectively wrong? If you say to me, okay, it's wrong because they can't consent, I'm saying, okay, why is doing something to someone that can't consent? Why is that wrong? What's your evidence for that? And then you point to something else. I'm gonna say, oh, I'm just gonna keep pushing this back,
Yeah,
and
because
eventually, what you're going to
morality is, yeah, what you're pushing against is the fact that morality as a whole is subjective, right? Morality has evolved with human beings.
you just said it's objectively wrong to morally
Yeah,
to morally sexually assault a child. You just said it. I got you to say it, right? So this is what happens with atheism: is you have to keep scooting back how you answer questions to
back
kind
your
of.
misunderstanding, right? So just like there are things in like things that are beautiful that most people would look at and say, yeah, that's objectively beautiful, like no one could disagree, this is beautiful, basically, right? There, we do those things in society, and for the most part you're probably right when you make those statements, right? Like most people would look at that and say, yeah, that's beautiful based on our understanding of beauty, right? And it's the same thing with morality. Like morality has evolved with human beings over time. So we didn't always think, as a society, we didn't always think
Wait,
that.
I don't think you understand what objective and subjective mean. I'm not saying that in a mean way. Like, it seems like you're trying to say, oh yeah, objectively it's wrong or objectively it's beautiful to you, but it's not the case to
No, no,
everyone
no,
else.
no.
Like,
With
listen, if something is
morality, with morality,
it's
we
something is
come to.
objective. Well, wait,
Yeah,
let's pump the brakes. In general, if something is objective, that means that is true, or whether or not that's true or false is independent of whether or not it is true or false, independent of the person holding it. So let's take the thing 5 plus 5 equals 10. That's objective. It doesn't matter whether or not I believe it's true, it's still true. It doesn't matter if you believe it's true, it's still true. Its truth value is
right,
independent of the people who hold it. Something that's subjective is something like vanilla ice cream tastes better than chocolate ice cream.
right.
That's something, well, the truth of that changes based on who holds it. And so what I'm asking you is something like, is sexually assaulting a child, is that something where it's like 5 plus 5 equals 10? Like, no, that is just objectively the case that that's wrong. Or is it more like, okay, that's just a preference, like vanilla ice cream versus
No,
chocolate?
it's objectively wrong.
I'm on board. I'm on board. So let's go with that, right? So I'm just now gonna argue against that intuition. So you have that based on an intuition, like intuitively you recognize that's wrong. Like that just strikes you as wrong, right?
No, there's plenty of reasons besides intuition to know that's
Okay,
wrong.
so give them. Great. This is gonna be fun. Give them. Like I don't think you recognize the problem you're about to walk into, but go ahead. Go for a reason. Give me one reason.
Yeah, it causes harm to the
Okay, wait. So
subject.
let's stop there. Okay, okay. So causing harm is wrong, right? Like that's your premise.
Uh, to a certain extent, yeah.
Okay, so objectively, causing harm is wrong.
Uh, I would say causing harm uh in
Without good reason, something like that. We can. I'm not gonna got you on like something like that. We'll say causing harm without good reasons, or causing harm just for the
well, the
sake of it.
intent behind the harm you're doing matters too, right? Like if you're not, that's what it's like. If you do something and you don't know that it's going to cause harm, were you technically morally wrong in that situation? No, but if you do something that causes harm with the intent of causing harm, and you know that your actions are going to cause harm, then that's morally objectable. Yeah.
Okay, so let's, I'm not gonna try to. I'm not gonna attack kind of just the. I'm not gonna nickel and dime you, so to speak, on that kind of statement because it causes harm. Like I'm not gonna get into that. I'm not gonna like play philosophy. Here's what I'm asking: is like, okay, well, how do you know that that is actually the case, that causing harm is morally wrong?
Because it defeats sort of the objective of being an alive, productive human being, right? Morality is subjective to human beings.
Let's pause there. Okay, so it defeats the objective, or it defeats life, or something like that. It kind of defeats what our bodies are naturally striving towards. Okay, why is it objectively wrong to perform an action which goes against what our bodies naturally strive towards? Why is that objectively wrong? How do you know that?
It's not that that's objectively wrong. It's that we have um uh evolved ways of recognizing all aspects of harm. It's not just one aspect of harm, you know what I'm saying? Like the psychological harm that's caused to a child, right? Before we didn't know. That's why child brides used to be like accepted, like 13-year-old, 14-year-old wives used to be accepted because people didn't know the harm that it caused a child to be married at that age, right? The developmental processes that our brain goes through.
Still
So
importing this value. You're still importing this moral intuition that you have. Like that's what I'm trying to get you to realize is if you want to commit to saying that sexually assaulting a child is objectively morally wrong, there's going to reach a point where the justification for that is just you're going to have to be like that just seems intuitively obvious to me. Like you're going to have to rely on intuition.
That's
And
not true
anything
at
you
all.
try to do, because here's the thing, I've already illustrated this with you. Anytime you try to point to something else and you say, oh, but it harms the child, I'm just going to ask this question, okay, why is harming the child objectively wrong? You say, oh, well, it goes against how biology functions. You say, okay, why is going against how biology functions objectively wrong? And then when I keep pressing you on that, ironically, you then start to transition into a type of kind of subjectivist evolutionary explanation. And so it's like you're not realizing that the same type of arguments you're giving me for why you're not going to recognize objective beauty, those are the exact same arguments which, if you were consistent in your epistemology, they are going to lead you to saying that you can't even know it's objectively wrong to sexually assault a child. Like I'm pointing out where your epistemology takes you.
Know, though. We know now because of how our morality has evolved. We know now, like so our morality started out right whenever we were first human beings. Our morality started out completely different than it is now because we were different then as human beings, right? So when we
How
first,
do you know what we have now is right? How do you know what we have now is right?
I mean, I guess you don't know, for instance, but you do. We do have strong evidence to suggest that we're doing better now than we were back then, based on.
No, listen, so that's a question. That would be an argument about, okay, the beliefs we have now, maybe they're more advantageous for forming society. But why should we think that the moral beliefs that we have now, you're saying, oh, these are different than what we had in the past?
No, that's not.
Okay,
That's not at all what I said. You keep interrupting me and trying to reframe what I'm saying without actually letting me finish.
well, in
So
my defense, you ramble from one thing to the next in such a way, and I'm not like that happens a lot. I get it. Like we do philosophy, like thoughts interconnect. But I've just learned with it with lives. Like if I let people talk for a minute or two, then I have like 10 things I have to address. So I'm trying. If I see an issue, I try to cut it off real quick. And I do have a couple other people in the chat who are wanting to come up. I don't think we're making much headway here. So if you want, I'll give you maybe like 30 seconds to a minute to kind of like have the last word on this. I always, when I have people come up, I want to give them the last word as kind of a show of good faith, and then I'll have somebody else come up.
yeah, so basically, I feel like you can have things that are objective based on based on evidence, and also that just like basically line up with what is known to be subjective to human beings. Like I was saying earlier, like whenever societies first started out, right, and it was just a handful of people living together, right, that's all we knew was survival, right? So like I knew if I treated this infant, correctly, kept them warm, kept them fed, kept them safe from the elements and like predators and things like that, they would survive, right? And if another human being, was to harm that infant and prevent it from growing up and continuing, the species, obviously that would be bad for everyone. And so everyone had that understanding in the beginning of humanity, is that things that harm the individual harms the collective, right? So that's the beginning of our morality, is if it harms the individual, it harms the collective, right? So now our morality has evolved to a point.
I'm sorry, man. I tried to give you some warning there that I was going to have to cut you off, but you're way past a minute. Thank you for coming up. J. Rob, what's on your mind, man?
Much, man. I forgot I was in the queue, man. I'm a Christian, man, and I've seen some of your videos a while back, and I was like, yeah, this dude's on point. This is my first time seeing you go live, and I'm like, yeah, dude hitting.
Well, thanks for coming up, dude. I'm gonna see. I see that I had one other person in the chat who was. I have a couple other people. I appreciate your kind words. If you're not wanting to fight me, I'm gonna probably let somebody else come up. But I do appreciate those kind words.
I kind of did want, not necessarily fight, but the arguments that you're making, I kind of like it, but I like want to play with it, I guess.
Okay, yeah, play with me. Yeah, let's go.
Cause all right, so one of the things that you said earlier is the beauty doesn't have to be objective. It could be subjective. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, if it's all subjective, what makes it like, because like you said, doo doo and all these other things are ugly. That intuitively, what I'm saying. So if you got both, if you got beauty and ugly, how do we connect that to? What I'm saying? It's all like if the atheist position is just all random, right? There's a bunch of random
Yeah.
stuff going on.
So if somebody denies objective beauty, and so I had this conversation with someone earlier. If someone says, okay, listen, there's nothing objective about beauty, I'm like, okay, I can just rephrase this argument. I can just say, okay, listen, in my experience, things which provoke me to kind of attributing beauty to them, things that I find beautiful and things that most people find beautiful, these are things that almost always have artistic intent behind them. It's pretty rare for these kind of profoundly beautiful things to come about in the absence, or excuse me, it's kind of unlikely for these things that strike us as being profoundly beautiful. It's really unlikely for these to come about in the absence of artistic intent. Even with artistic intent, it tends to be kind of hard to make these things that are profoundly beautiful. There's a lot of bad artists in the world. There's a lot of people who go get 4-year degrees on how to be a better creative writer, or how to be a better musician, or how to be a better painter, and a lot of times they struggle to make a career of it. Like it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort kind of to make these things that strike us as profoundly beautiful. And so I'm like, okay, well listen, when I look at the natural world, I'm like, oh, this strikes me as probably this is something that strikes me as profoundly beautiful, and it probably strikes me as profoundly beautiful more so than anything else I've ever experienced. And so if I'm going to kind of like go with how my inductive reasoning works, I'm saying, okay, well, things like this just don't usually come about. Things that strike me in this way don't usually come about in the absence of artistic intent. And so it's unlikely, under atheism, where there is no artistic intent behind the universe, it's really unlikely for me to have this natural world in which so much of it strikes me as profoundly beautiful. Whereas theism, this is predicted under theism, because theism says, no, there is artistic intent behind the universe. So this is this type of natural world provoking me to have this response to it. That is something which is probable under theism. It's not at all surprising. It's what we would expect, and it's very unlikely, very surprising under atheism. Now, I just gave that entire argument. I didn't say anything about objective beauty. Nothing about beauty being objective or not plays into that. Now, I think we have strong intuitive reasons to think that the mountain, something like this is actually objectively beautiful. But my argument doesn't hinge on that. But I would point out that the explanation that I give, which is like, no, these are things that are have artistic intent behind them. These maintain our intuitions, which is that something like this is beautiful. Like our intuitively, we say the mountain is beautiful. Like like that statement is one which it sounds like we're saying like there's a property that the mountain has, like it's beautiful. So I'm allowing you not only to have an explanation, but have an explanation that captures and preserves our intuitions of the natural world. So yeah, that's kind of my argument as a whole. I think the objectivity of beauty strengthens my argument, but I can still make a lot of progress. I can make a lot of tracks without granting that.
Right. So would you say the ugly it would also kind of like have the same sort of like, I guess, explanatory power? Like,
Yes,
because we can notice the difference between beauty and ugly, like you get what I'm saying? Like, it's all random if from a like atheist point of view. If we're just looking at the world and saying, oh, this is beauty and this is ugly, it's all random to them. So how do we like, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I think the question that we have to ask is if there's some process that goes about and it has no artistic intent behind it, it's just purely driven by random forces. Based on our experiences, should we expect the results of that process to strike us as profoundly beautiful? And based off all my experiences in the world, if there's no artistic intent behind it, if it's just random, then my inductive reasoning tells me, yeah, I shouldn't expect that final product to be profoundly beautiful or to strike me as being profoundly beautiful. But then I look at the natural world and I say, oh, well, this does strike me as being profoundly beautiful, which seems to be like, oh, well, this isn't what's expected under the naturalistic explanation. So, okay, maybe I need to find another explanation. We'll say, okay, well, theism offers an explanation as well. But if theism is the case, which says, theism says that the world was created by this kind of, cosmic artist, Well, if that's the case, I sure would expect for the final product to be something that strikes me as profoundly beautiful. And oh, looky there, what I see in the world is a final product that strikes me as profoundly beautiful. So this is kind of like the type of Bayesian reasoning that someone like Than at Exploring Reality uses. It's like, okay, look at the data and then look at the two competing hypotheses. Ugh, too many S's in that. Look at the data and then look at the different theories. Which one of these theories makes the data we have more expected? And I think it's just clear to me that theism makes the beauty that we see in the natural world, and the kind of intuitions that we have about it and our responses to it. I think theism clearly makes that more expected.
Right, right, right. I know Than too. He loves the Bayesian stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't think. I guess my question is, like, when it comes to like the ugly, like, we just see a bunch of ugly stuff, and then we like, okay, that's also random as well.
So is your argument? So is kind of the argument you're flirting with is like, hey, listen, Garb, you're pointing to all this beautiful stuff and saying, this is evidence of a cosmic artist, but why can't I do the same thing with all this ugly stuff? Like, doesn't this ugly stuff seem to indicate that there's not a cosmic artist behind it? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Right.
Yeah. So here's what
basically, like, yeah, like there's a whole bunch of data, right? There's a lot of data that we could look at, but so being that there's so much data, we're gonna have some things that a lot of people think is beautiful, and we're gonna also have a lot of things that people think are ugly. So, but it's all the amount of data you have is, there's gonna be some beauty in it, and there's also gonna be some ugly in it too, no matter what.
So let's then take a step back and look at something like a painting. If I have a painting, I mean, I'm trying to think if I could use this thing behind me. If I have a painting, and let's say I think the painting's really beautiful. If I zoom in on that painting, like if I kind of just get closer and closer, and I just kind of zoom in, like if it's on the computer, and I get down to like one of the corners. So an example of this is a Storm on the Sea of Galilee by, I think it's Rembrandt. I think it's a really beautiful painting. But if you zoom in on just that one corner, I would be like, oh, that in isolation, that's ugly. Like just that one part, like there's nothing beautiful about that. But it's when one steps back and looks at the painting as a whole, where you're like, okay, like the painting as a whole is beautiful, and that thing which in isolation is ugly, that contributes to the beauty of the whole painting. And I can do this with music as well. If you're listening to a symphony, you may be listening to a symphony, and one of the instruments, maybe the violins, maybe if you just took the violins in isolation and you only listen to them, maybe you would think, oh, this isn't really a beautiful song. It's kind of discordant. It's kind of it grates on me. But that discordance or that grating of the violins in the entire piece does contribute to an overall piece which is beautiful. And so with the universe and with the natural world, I mean, like, yeah, there are some things where if you zoom in, you say, okay, I'm looking at this pile of dirt, or I'm looking at this, this pile of feces. I'm like, ah, this isn't beautiful any more than that little corner of the painting is beautiful, but it is part of a grander kind of cosmic picture, which I think is clearly beautiful. If you kind of zoom out and you look at something on like the macro level, it's something that is clearly beautiful. So yeah, I think that spots that are ugly are something that should be expected if we think that the universe is the result of a cosmic artist. And I would point out that so something that's ugly, that's to be expected if an artist is behind things. Like that isn't something that's unlikely. But what is unlikely is these kind of beautiful things coming about if an artist isn't behind this. So you see what I'm saying here? So like ugliness doesn't that's not something that's unexpected under the God explanation. But beauty is something that's unexpected under the atheism explanation.
That's man, I like that. I don't know if you got other people waiting, man, but that was pretty much my initial objection.
I got a few other people waiting. So if you have any other questions, I can let them come up. But those are good thoughts. I like those objections.
Yeah, man. I'm gonna follow you, man. Do you go on live? This is my first time seeing you live. Do you go live a lot or?
It's hit or miss. Like I keep on saying I'm gonna do live more, and then something comes up in my life and I just can't do lives regularly. I want to do lives more, but I post videos regularly. I post a lot of videos, usually at least once or twice a week, sometimes every day, depending on how much free time I have. So I post regularly, and I'm trying to do more lives. Yeah.
All right, bet. Well, I'm gonna follow you, man. if you don't mind, if you got anything that you could I'm gonna DM you. If you could DM me some literature or something, I like to look into some of the
Yeah,
stuff
DM me.
you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah. Slide into my DMs. I have people do that all the time. I'm happy with my recommendations. Yeah,
All right, man. Appreciate it.
yeah, dude, for sure.
God bless.
God bless. All right, let's see. I don't know how to pronounce. I don't know what the name is of this person that I just invited up. Let's see. Hey, what's up?
Hey, you got me?
Yeah, what do you want me to call you? I don't know if you actually have a name.
It's Roy. Sorry,
Okay, Roy. What's up, Roy?
and it's Garb.
Yeah, Garb. Yeah. So I see people saying to change the layout. This happens. Sorry, 1 second, Roy. We can't see what is written behind you. It says beauty is evidence for God changed my mind. I don't know how to get that from stopped being messed up. Like every time I create a backdrop and put it up, TikTok smushes it, and I just keep on editing it. What side is getting cut off? Like couldn't
Right now, it's for me. It's clear. It wasn't before, but now it is.
It's so weird. It's clear for me too. I don't know why it does this. What side is
Yeah,
getting cut off?
and it does this on everybody's live, so it's a TikTok problem, not a user problem.
The left is cut off. Okay, and in the future, I'll take this, I'll take that backdrop and I'll shift it to the right. I can't do it on live because this is just a photo, but I'll do it for the next time. Yeah, eventually I'll get it right. Okay, so Roy, what you thinking about?
Yeah, it was the previous guy, not this last guy, but the guy before. You were on something about uh, objectiveness of essaying a child or something like that. I kind of want you to continue because that guy didn't really answer you, and I don't really know if he knew what you were talking about. But what were you trying to go at him with whether or not essaying a child is objectively wrong?
Yeah. So the reason I brought up morality, kind of as an analogy, because that is an area that I think is similar. It's just some of these discussions that we have about, I guess you could say discussions of value, whether or not the value being discussed is moral value, aesthetic value, stuff like that. Because he kind of wanted to just say, okay, listen, you have your intuitions about what is beautiful and not. But that's just you can't based off your intuition say that something is objective or subjective. And kind of one of the things that I was pointing out is like we all do this with morality. Like we all have intuitions about things being objectively wrong or objectively right. And there's kind of moral gray areas that people disagree on, but there tends to be pretty broad
Yeah,
agreement. There are some things that
for the
are
most part, there's a lot of things that I think that we all can kind of agree are objectively wrong, right? Like
yeah.
as a society,
Yeah. And so my thing is like, listen, all these arguments you're giving me for why I shouldn't think that beauty is objective. It's like, okay, well, like those are gonna entail you thinking that SA isn't objectively wrong either. Like, are you willing to commit to that position? Because I hold the position that if it seems to me like this is just objectively beautiful, like if this strikes me as beautiful and the feces doesn't, and like that seems obvious to me, like I think that I'm rational on making inferences based on that experience, unless I have a defeater.
sure. And I just think that I don't think it'd be objective then, right? Like it would just like that's your subjective belief of what beauty is, right?
I think it is subjective. Like it seems to me like with the person who looks at feces and says, yeah, that's the beautiful thing. Like my intuition there is just like, no, they're wrong. And it's not just my opinion they're wrong. It's just like, no, they're wrong. Like that's just my intuition, just as much as the person who says SA is morally permissible. Like my reaction to them is like, yeah, no, you're wrong. Like it's just comparable. It's like that's my rational intuition there, and I don't see any reason why I should give up that intuition that the person who prefers the feces to the mountain is like
Sure,
objective.
sure. But like, wouldn't that vary? Like there are definitely situations in which you would find that feces beautiful. Let's say you were, yeah, I don't know, you got in a plane crash on a mountain or something like that, and you didn't have any food. Well, all of a sudden, the corn, and I know this is gross, but the corn in there is going to be very beautiful. So, beauty and yeah, while you would think that crap is not beautiful, it would be in a different moment, maybe.
Yeah, so I think that I don't think even in a moment like that I would find it beautiful. I might be happy to see it, right? So let's say I come across the mountain and then okay, there we go. I see this feces and I'm like at first I'm like, oh, feces, but then I see like corn or maybe I don't know, there's like a deer near it and he hasn't noticed me and I'm confident in my abilities to sneak up and kill the deer or something. I don't know, we'll just play pretend here for a second. I'm gonna be like, oh yes, I'm so thankful to see the corn or the feces. But just because Sorry, Than. Just because somebody is thankful to see the feces doesn't mean they would think it's beautiful. Like there are lots of things that are ugly that I've been thankful to see them, but I'm like, it's still ugly. I still don't think that's as beautiful as like this, like the epitome of beauty or something like that.
Okay. Okay, yeah. All right. Yeah, that's I didn't want to take up too much of your time. I just wanted some clarification on that. All right, brother.
Tell you what, I will probably have one more person come up if anyone's wanting to argue about the prompt, which is apparently cut off, which is beauty is evidence for God. Changed my mind. If anybody wants to argue about that, they're welcome to come up. I think I see Sway. I see you in there, Sway. Are you wanting to argue against this? Are you wanting to argue against me, or are you on board with it? I'm trying to. Okay, so you're wanting to argue with me. Great. Let's bring you out. Let's do it. What's up, man?
Yeah, how's it going? Before we start, though, I realize I'm educated in philosophy. I'm not. I've taken maybe a few YouTube courses of philosophy, but my understanding is not in that field. So, if that's okay with you, then we can proceed.
Appreciate the alternative perspective. Yeah.
Say that one more time.
I appreciate the alternative perspective from someone like who's this is all hitting fresh. Like that's good. That has value.
No, for sure. Yeah, my degree was evolutionary anthropology and world history. And anyway, two things. Right before we start, I was arguing with two people in the comments, which was a little bit disingenuous. I'm arguing here with Billy Lemons, who claims that there's more evidence for the existence of Jesus Christ versus Alexander the Great. That's historically untrue, and is not necessary to believe that Jesus Christ existed whatsoever.
Okay, so I don't know what you came. I mean, Lemons is right there. The evidence that we have for I think that Lemons is right there. The historical documents we have supporting the existence of Jesus are closer to the time of Jesus' existence and more plentiful than the documents for Alexander the Great.
Well, as far as I know, we have two historian documents within 70 years of Jesus' life. Is that correct, or is there more?
So within the first, let's see, Jesus died in 33.
And there's Flavius.
So within the first 70 years of Jesus' life, we have 4 biographical works that reference his existence. We have several letters from Paul, which reference his existence. Those come about within 15, 20 years after the life and death of Christ. And then the earliest thing we have for Jesus is there's a pre-Pauline creed in 1 Corinthians that most scholars, regardless of religious affiliation, they date that to within 3 to 5 years after the death of Christ. And then we have extra biblical stuff, like you mentioned, by Josephus, Tacitus, Marabar, Serapon, who else? Plenty of the younger stuff like that who mentioned Jesus.
So for Alexander the Great, we have Aristotle, Callisthenes, Ptolemy. We also have Callisthenes, Plutarch, and Diodorus Siculus. We also have coins that are imprinted with Alexander's name and monuments. So I'm not sure how that equates to less evidence, which is, I mean, it's a non sequitur in my opinion. It's not a relevant question. It's just a weird statement.
Yeah. So I would point out, though, I would say, when are those other documents written? Like, when are the documents by Aristotle and all that written?
Alexander studied directly under Aristotle.
Okay. So then that would my understanding is that the earliest biographical work we have on Alexander the Great is something like a couple hundred years after his death. Now I can double check that, like the.
Oh no, for sure. I mean, it's my degree. We literally have Ptolemaic history. We have the Ptolemaic accounts. We have the campaigns of Alexander by Anabasis Alexandri. This is literally what I studied in college, right? So it's not. I'm not trying to decry the existence of Jesus whatsoever, but the statement is ridiculous. It's nonsensical, and it actually doesn't do anything to help either side. It's like me saying there's more history for George Washington than Abraham Lincoln.
Okay,
So
I see what you're saying. You say, okay, I got you. Yeah.
it's a stupid comment. And then the other comment that was ridiculous was I respect people and their beliefs. What that means is if someone calls themselves a Christian, I call them a Christian. If someone calls themselves a Muslim, I call them a Muslim. If someone calls themselves an atheist, I call themselves an atheist. So I was arguing with a lady that was telling me that Mormons aren't Christians, and we were discussing what makes a Christian, and I told her it's a follower of Christ. It's right there in the word. And she said, no, it's not. I'm like, well, then you go tell the entire Mormon faith that they're not Christians. They're going to disagree with you, because you have to respect what they believe in and of themselves, regardless of your personal faith, because your personal faith has no impact on their personal faith. Would you agree?
Run that last part by me again. I'm sorry. I caught the part before it.
No, for sure. Your personal faith has no impact on their personal faith. What a Christian denomination thinks has no impact on the other denomination of Christianity or Judaism or Hinduism or Islam.
Truth value or something like that?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Like so something like, let's say something like Mormonism, that religious tradition doesn't have any effect on the truth or the falsehood of that religious tradition, doesn't have any impact on the truth or falsehood of my religious position.
Exactly my point.
Okay, yeah. So I would agree with that. Like that stands or falls independently. And I mean, with something like Mormons, there's within pretty much any religious tradition, there's a pretty broad range of people who take on those labels, and they have a broad range of beliefs. So with Mormons, there are people who they may give themselves the label Mormon, but if you talk with them, they sound a lot like Southern Baptist. And there are people who may take on the label Christian, and if you talk with them, they may sound a whole lot like atheists. Like, so I'm not in the I'm not also into the game of being like, oh, they're not Christians, like whatever. Like I'm just
Well, it's completely disingenuous. It's like calling a Muslim they're not Muslim because it's a no true Scotsman fallacy.
I'm not super into this in semantics. I try not to be. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but yeah.
You're a philosophy major. Come on, that's like practically the whole spiel, isn't it?
Well, I try not to do the game of like, oh, well, you're not a Christian. If someone says I'm a Christian or if I'm an atheist or this and that, I'd rather debate the ideas behind the labels rather than just being like, oh, you're not actually an atheist, you're an agnostic, or you're not an agnostic, you're an atheist. Like sometimes those semantic debates come up, and I'll weigh into them sometimes, but like that's not my preference. And with things like Jehovah's Witness or Mormon or whatever, I'd be like, I don't really care about whether or not we slap this label on them. I'd rather just talk about the ideas that differentiate them from kind of more
And
straight.
yeah, for sure. That's the reason I followed you in the first place. Is because when I listened to you talk a few days ago, there are very few on TikTok. I'm not saying in general, but on TikTok, at least in my experience, there are very few intellectually honest Christians. And what I'm finding very fascinating is the majority of the intellectually honest Christians have a philosophy background. I wonder why that is.
Yeah, that's me and a lot of Christians have been saying for a long time, guys. You really need to teach these Christians philosophy in seminary. There was actually, I don't know what your background is like religiously, but there was a really famous man, I forgot which one it was. There's a really famous theologian, like household name in most Christian houses, and he had a whole speech about why seminaries need to be teaching philosophy to some of the to their students, is because like, and there's even an old quote that theology is the king of the sciences, but philosophy is it's handmaiden. So it's this idea of like you can't separate philosophy from theology. So yeah, I'm
Interesting.
very my philosophy background.
Out of curiosity, and right before we start with the prompt, is it necessary to prove God exists, philosophically or otherwise?
Necessary to prove it? Necessary for what?
To prove that God exists, either philosophically or otherwise.
But when you say is it necessary, like necessary for what? Necessary to
Is
have
is it
faith?
biblical? Does the Bible indicate in any way, anywhere in Scripture, that we need to have a philosophical foundation for understanding that God is real, or is the requisite of faith?
Yeah. So I'm gonna be a philosopher now. I am gonna be a little bit pedantic with the terms. I'd rather say like, do we have evidence? So when you say proof, right? That word sometimes in our everyday language that gets used in ways that are not super precise. Let me give you an example. So if let's say my friend comes up to me and he says like, "Hey man, I can do a triple backflip. Just like standing here, I can jump up and do a triple backflip." I can
So
be
prove
like,
it.
yeah, you might be like, yeah, prove it. And let's say you do it, like he does it, right? And you're like, all right, you proved it. Like that's a like kind of like a loose like usage of proof, but he didn't prove that by like a really strong like understanding of proof, like how proof is used in like mathematics or logic, where it's like you
No,
show it's impossible. So the reason I bring this up is if you're saying, talking about like proving God in this like really strong mathematical or logical sense, like I don't think that's necessary for much of anything, if even possible.
so what
But
does philosophy provide in that same wavelength?
So I think philosophy in regard to philosophy of religion or philosophy just in general.
Philosophy in regard to providing a foundation for why I should believe a God exists
Oh
whatsoever.
yeah. So I think philosophy can provide evidence. So most things that we do in life, I mean, there are some attempts to give like a proof for God, and whether or not those end up working depends on how you think some of the premises get cashed out. But let's suppose there's no like proof of God in this way. Philosophy could still provide evidence. So let me give an example. Science doesn't provide proof for like anything, or like
No, you're
almost.
right. It's evidence, correct.
But it can provide a whole lot of evidence. Yeah, it can, and so I think science has value when pursuing truth because it can, through kind of that process and that thinking, we can get evidence for things. So I think philosophy can also provide evidence for God by kind of taking premises that seem to be true and drawing out implications of them and things like that. Yeah.
So essentially, the evidence you're suggesting it exists in words, not not outside of the logical loops that are created to provide the evidence for God. Correct?
I wouldn't want to say that the evidence like exists in the words. I don't know what that means. So, for instance, like because the prompt that I have on my thing is, I think beauty is evidence for God, and so here I am thinking that the evidence is not something that's words. It's either something that's in the natural world, kind of inherent to the objects. If you think as I do that when we say the mountain is beautiful, we're making a statement about the object and not merely something that's going on in our minds. Or
Sure.
even if you think even if you're gonna be like a what's it called, like a subjectivist about beauty, and say, listen, when we make statements about beauty, what we're really doing is we're making statements about internal mental states that we have. Even if you take that position, well, even then, it wouldn't be that the evidence is in words. It would then be that the evidence for God is like up here somewhere. So I just use, I would say that the evidence is the
I'm sorry,
data.
I didn't see that leap you just made. Can you repeat that sentence when you said the evidence isn't necessarily in the beauty, but it's in what?
Yeah, so so there's a position in aesthetics, which is that when we say that something is beautiful, like if I say the mountain is beautiful, I'm actually not making a statement about the mountain. Like I'm not describing anything to you about the mountain. What I'm actually doing is I'm making a statement to you about my psychology. Like I'm making I say something like I have sublime thoughts, or like my thoughts toward that mountain are beautiful. Like I'm making a statement about something internal up here. So if it was the case that I was making the argument that and I did play with this idea earlier, is like, even if I wanted to go with that, which I don't think that's a good view of beauty, but let's say I grant that, I still think that can constitute evidence for God. So let's suppose I granted that. If I went down that line of thought, I'd be like, okay, well, like the evidence, so to speak, like if I was gonna like locate it in this kind of weird way, I'd be like, okay, it's in my mental faculties. It's kind of in a vague sense going on up here. It's not like something inherent in words or like existing out in the ether, floating around or something like that.
Okay, I see your worldview. Are all philosophical concepts true?
Are all concepts that have been proposed in philosophy true? No, they can't all be true because some are contradictory.
Correct. And also, we have a philosophy of things that do not exist in reality that we can verify or falsify, such as Superman, right?
Well, actually, Superman's not really something that we can falsify. I mean,
Right, because there's no data for him. There's no data to verify or falsify.
well, yeah, so we can't falsify him, but we may say that you're unjustified in believing in Superman because you don't think you have data or something along those lines.
Right.
Yeah.
So this provides my next point. So philosophical concept requires verifiable data to become part of reality. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, not at all. I don't think that I have to provide any type of verifiable data. And so by verifiable data, I mean data that's like maybe accessible to you or accessible to the people in the audience. I don't have to provide any verifiable data for a belief that I have in order for me to be justified in thinking that belief is true.
You agree? I mean, I agree, because Mormons believe in Mormonism, Hindus believe in Hinduism, right? So they're justified in their beliefs by the very nature that they believe something. Whether or not there's data for it is irrelevant. But
No.
that's
When I'm saying justified, I'm using that in the sense of like epistemology, and this is my fault because if you're coming from outside the field, you could have known that. So I should have just been more clear.
no, for sure.
I'm meaning this in a way of like rationally justified. So let me give. So if we were to ask, what does it mean to know something, right? So in the philosophical literature, this is something that it comes up in the field of epistemology. It's like the study of knowledge. And so you might say, okay, what does it mean to say we know something? So one proposal of kind of how knowledge was understood for a long time is something in the vicinity of, you know something if you believe it, if it's true, and if you have some type of justification for that belief. So let me give an example. Let's say you wake up and you say, okay, I want to try to play the stock market, and I think that the Dow is going to go up like 10 points today. And let's say that you just come to believe that. You're just like, yeah, why not? Sounds like a good as position as any, and you just come to believe that. Like, and so that maybe let's say that's true. It happens to be the case that you get lucky and like the Dow does really go up 10 points that day. But that wasn't like, you weren't justified in making that belief. Like you kind of just pulled that out of your butt. And so you had a belief, it was true, but you weren't justified. So we wouldn't want to say that like you knew the Dow was going to go up. So in comparison, let's say I have the belief that my wife is in the other room, right? So it was like, okay, I have that belief. It's true. I'm pretty confident about that. It's like, am I justified? Well, yeah, I walked in there and saw her in there before I started this live, and I haven't heard her come out. So I have some justification for thinking she's still in there. So I would have justified true belief. So and I'm using justified in this sense, yeah, and like rationally justified.
So in essence, everybody rationally justifies their position regarding their beliefs.
Not all beliefs are justified. Yeah. So I want to be careful here. So not
So what's the
a belief
distinction of which beliefs are justified and which aren't justified if they're faith based, essentially without data?
Yeah, so several things here. So the question that we're getting at is a big question in the epistemology literature, and what is it that constitutes justification, and what is it that constitutes evidence, like or what are the things that constitute warrant? And there's a lot of disagreement about how we cash that out in epistemology. So some people say, okay, listen, your belief is justified if it's formed by cognitive faculties that are functioning properly, or something along those lines. So there are people who would say you're justified, what gives you justification is something internal to you. It's like other beliefs that you have. So maybe I have the belief that my wife is in the other room. That's justified because I have these other beliefs that are like, okay, well, like she was in there, I haven't heard her come out, like stuff like that. But then there are other people.
Before you continue, can you define the definition of belief you're utilizing here? Are we
Yeah,
talking
so
about trust, or are we talking about like Hebrews 11:1 type belief?
no. So a belief. I'm using belief in just the kind of generic way that it's used in philosophy, which is you take something to be true.
Okay,
So
so can we just use trust instead because it's confusing my non-religious mind?
okay, trust. That might.
No, trust is equivalent to belief. If belief
That
is
might
trust in
confuse
something.
me. I might have a hard time tracking that. So, like, let's say, for instance, like, I believe that I'm holding a pen right now. That just means I take it to be true that that's the case. So you
Is there
probably
data
believe.
for you holding the pen?
Do I now?
Is there data for you holding the pen?
Yeah, I
Is
have
there
experience.
observational data?
Yeah, so I have like
So,
visual data, stuff like that.
so that belief is trust because you have data to verify that trust.
So it's going to be hard for me to follow your use of trust here. How would you describe trust?
Trust is something that you depend on based on data. So I trust that I'm going to wake up tomorrow regarding reliable data that have woken up for the last 41 years.
Yeah, so I think you could trust someone even if you don't have data. So, like, let's say I'm going down the street and a guy
Sorry, I
comes.
just got a phone call.
Huh? Oh, sorry, he popped. Maybe he'll hop back on. Yeah. Okay. So we're at 50. We're at.
Phone call.
Okay, you're back. What's up? Yeah, so you can trust somebody without having any data to support that trust. Like that's what's confusing me. It's like if I'm walking down the street and a guy in a big like stovetop hat and a monocle comes up to me and he's using a cave and he's like, hey there, young man, let's play a game. If you give me $100, I promise you I'll give you $1 million. And I'm like, okay, random guy, here's 100. Like I trusted him. Really shouldn't have. I didn't have any data. Like, you know what I mean?
You didn't have any verifiable data to trust that man. So yes, you made a mistake in that exact situation.
Yeah. So I wouldn't I trusted him, but I shouldn't have. I was not justified in
I
that
see.
trust. Yeah.
Right, exactly. You had no data to back up your justification to that trust.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
in essence, so that's a distinction for me between a philosophical concept and what I call verifiable data in the world. So a philosophical concept is what you earlier stated. Not all of them are true. So how do we distinct the ones that are and the ones that aren't? So for me, the ones that are true require independently verifiable data from the statement. So if I make a claim, for instance, all grass is green, whatever concept I want to make, I have to go provide data for that statement. Same thing in philosophy. If I philosophically claim whatever it is, I don't know what a philosophy claim would be. For instance, whatever you have in your mind, I guess, you would have to provide verifiable data.
So yeah.
Yeah, so you would have to provide verifiable data to that claim for me to justify believing, as in trusting that that's true. So in essence,
when you have to provide verifiable data, are you saying I have to be able to provide verifiable data to other people?
I mean, if you're going to make a claim to other people, yes. But if it's an internal claim, then obviously belief is sufficient. But if you're going to make a claim to others, then yes, that requires verifiable data to the claim.
Okay, so if I want to convince somebody else or something, I have to be able to if I make that type of claim, I have to be able to show them some type of verifiable data. If I want to,
For instance, I'm a film producer.
yeah.
So when I ask
think
people,
that's wrong.
so when I ask people for money, I have to provide evidence that I'm in fact a film producer, that I'm not going to just run away with, $500,000 and go waste it on whatever. I have to provide proof that I'm going to make this film. And that's how I get people to trust me and invest in my films.
Yeah, if you wanna convince me, like that's gonna be needed. But you can be rationally justified for holding a position, even if you can't provide to other people any type of evidence that they can kind of go and look at.
Yes, but that justification exists only within you because you do not require independently verifiable data for your justifiable beliefs. Other people do require that data. Do you see the distinction there?
Yeah, but here's the thing though, is your view here would render us incapable of using testimony as evidence. So
That's exactly where I stand, as a matter of fact.
well, you have a horrible epistemology then, because almost everything you believe in the world is through testimony.
Well, no, I did go to school for evolutionary anthropology and world history, so I know how to.
Wait, when were you, if you don't mind me, and you can make up the answer here, when were you born? Like what year?
I was born in 1982
Okay, how do you know that?
because that's the year I was born. I'm 41 years old. I mean,
How do you know that's when you were born? Did somebody tell you that? Did somebody offer testimony of their experiences of when they were in the hospital?
I also have the actual birth certificate, my social
Okay,
security
but
card.
a birth certificate is a document that somebody created in which they are saying that you were born on that day. So that's also
Is
a
a birth
form of
certificate
testimony.
independently verifiable data or not in your worldview?
A birth certificate is a form of testimony, and other people can look at the document that contains that testimony, and then they can offer testimony about that.
Well, then you're right. If somebody wants to claim that my birth certificate is only a testimony, then they don't have to believe it. That's their position. It also doesn't matter to me.
That's a bad position, right? Like testimony is an inherent part of all of our reasoning. It's an inherent part of history. It's an inherent part of anthropology, science, like everything.
I wouldn't even call it a foundation. I would call it a step. Testimony is a step, but it's not but it's also the lowest step. It's like the top of the totem pole.
Okay, so elaborate on that for me.
So which part, the totem pole or the least reliable step?
Yeah, okay. So what's something that maybe in your industry you're really confident about?
Ooh, in my industry? Yeah, right. I'm not confident about anything in my industry. I
Okay,
literally
but then
worry
outside
about.
your industry, it can be anything. It can be like I don't know.
Let's talk
wanna-
about evolution. For instance, Leo
Okay.
changes over time. So I've seen the genetic data. I've done the
Okay, so
mathematical.
let's stop there right there. You've seen the genetic data. Did you perform the experiments yourself, or did you read about other experiments?
No, I have performed experiments. We performed experiments with hawthorn flies in my lab.
Cool. Okay, so when you performed those experiments, did in any way, shape, or form did you draw on any other knowledge or experience that anybody else did?
Well, of
Like when
course,
you
and that's-
interpreted, okay, yeah. So then you were using their testimony to do science. Like you
right.
yourself use testimony.
Correct, right? So I take their statement, their claim, their testimony, and then I verify or falsify it through independently verifiable data.
Okay, so now suppose you're in my shoes, right? I ain't got a lab, my friend, and so I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, should I believe this or not? I have you testifying for something, and that's all I got. And then maybe
No,
have a
I
couple-
agree. What I say is irrelevant to what the data says. So no scientist cares what another scientist thinks. They only care about their data.
Yeah, but then even then though, like unless it's something that you specifically did in the lab, you're taking what they said. If a scientist says, "Hey, I did this. Here's my data," and then here's what I think about my data, even if you just say, "Okay, I'm going to ignore the kind of the discussion part of the paper and I'm just going to look at the results," looking at the results, that's still you taking their testimony.
Looking at the results doesn't mean anything. I have to go independently verify the results. That's how we work in science, right?
So you can't tell me that every single thing you believe about the world scientifically is something that you've personally verified through
No,
a
of
lab.
course not. I mean, that's an impossibility for anybody. But the things that I have.
So you take testimony as a form of evidence when you construct your worldview. Like that's what I'm getting at. Here, is we
If
can't-
you understand the scientific method, which I know you do, you realize that the independent verification process to a claim is incredibly reliable. As a matter of fact, it's the most reliable system we have on the planet as of now.
But wait a second, because then if other people repeat that process and then they tell me the same thing, like okay, that's just more testimony. You understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah, that's right. That's why it's called. You know what the
you're saying
independently
is
part means?
Is I can pile up testimony, but piling up testimony would not give you evidence unless
I
there's
agree.
something about evidence that offers
That's
that.
That's why the qualifier matters. Independently verifiable. I know you're hearing the word independently verifiable data. I'm not saying verifiable data or testimonies upon testimonies about the data. Independently verifiable means you have to independently verify it. And if you understand the scientific,
independently verifiable.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
But not all claims are things that can kind of be researched in this philosophical way, and in this kind of.
Well, let's talk about that. So, what do we do with concepts that cannot be verified or falsified?
Well, it depends on if it's a concept that cannot be verified. As in, when you say verified, as in I give somebody else some data and they can look at that data and then they offer testimony in support of mine. Is that what you're saying? Or
No,
verify?
no. For instance, if a concept has no data to verify or falsify, it remains a concept and not a verifiable a fact.
Okay, but we
So
need to talk about what you mean by verifiable. Because are you saying that in like prove this to be true, or you just mean offer additional evidence for it?
let's go real simple here. If I make the claim that if you pick something up and it drops to the ground, if you let it go, if I make that claim and you do it yourself, you independently verified my claim. You said, let me try this way. I'm going to pick this up. I'm going to drop it. Oh man, you're right. Everything I pick up and drop is verifiable independently through my own experimentation.
So you can verify that through your experimentation. Great. You can do all that. But what if there's a claim in which it's not something that you can just easily like pick up and test it?
So for
Then
instance, like the long process of macroevolution.
that's not what I had in mind, but I was thinking more of something like maybe like you're a wildlife photographer and there's a bird that hardly ever gets seen, like it's just super rare, and you happen to see it while you're out one day, and then someone says, oh, there's this bird in this ecosystem, and he starts trying to go testify to Congress to like protect the ecosystem or something. And let's suppose all the congressmen go out and they say, oh well, I walked around in that forest, I didn't see anything, therefore you're full of nonsense. This isn't verifiable. Well, like we should pump the brakes there, because like the fact that they didn't go see that thing doesn't undercut the testimony of the guy who he was out there. He spends a lot of time out there. He knows what he was kind of looking for, and he's giving testimony about it. And if we had multiple people who like maybe he was out there with a team, and so we had like 4 or 5 people saying like, no, we as a team, like we saw this incredibly rare bird. Even if we sent 100 people out there and they're like, yeah, we didn't see anything, like that would not undercut the testimony that they had. That's not something that's like gravity where you can just drop a pin and be like, aha, like it's verified.
I agree, but nobody would give that. Nobody would give that wildlife photographer any money to do further research until he provided more data for it. So me claiming that I saw Bigfoot, or 10 people claiming they saw Bigfoot, isn't sufficient data because it's testimonial based without actual.
Wait. So I actually don't think that's the case. Like if I had a large enough group of like scientists who were like offering testimony that they saw something here, I'm pretty sure like if those were all respected people, like people would be willing to invest in that for further investigation. But then that's I think that's wrong. But then also let's suppose I grant that. It's like, okay, why should whether or not other people are willing to invest in that is irrelevant to whether or not am I rationally justified in thinking that bird was actually out there? Like, let's say I'm on Congress, and this guy is trying to lobby to like protect this ecosystem, and he's like, listen, there's this extremely rare bird out there. Like, we think this may be one of the last ones on the planet.
Let's call it the dodo bird because it's extinct, right?
Okay, let's go for that. Yeah, but the dodo bird is something we know is it like extinct, right? So maybe this is something like we've just thought it's endangered for a while. We haven't seen it in a while, but we've been looking. Maybe we have a few in captivity elsewhere.
Oh, as a matter of fact, we just found the 200-year-old tortoise on the Galapagos Islands that we thought was extinct.
Okay, so in that case, I'm on Congress. In that case,
we have photographs of the tortoise. We have video of the tortoise.
Okay, but no, let's stop there. So you have, I have a photograph of the tortoise. It's like, okay, well here's the thing though, photos can be faked. So you're giving me testimony that this is a real photo. And let's say you get a bunch of lab technicians and they're like, all right, we're gonna scour this to see if this is real or fake.
Yeah, forensics.
Okay, but then I have testimony from lab technicians. Like it's testimony all the way down, unless you're actually in the room looking at it.
Right.
Yeah.
The least assumptions is usually correct, so the data would verify or falsify the claim.
The what now?
The least assumptions is typically the most correct assumption. So that would verify or falsify. The lab technicians would verify or falsify whether or not the picture has been doctored or if it's stock film photography, which most wildlife photographers use. I mean, some of them do use digital, of course, but a lot of the classes.
But you're still trusting their testimony. Because my view is with testimony, if someone's giving us testimony about what they've experienced, we should take that testimony as innocent until proven guilty. Like, I don't think that we should just be like, oh no, like they're liars.
Sure. I mean, we certainly do, but we still ask for independently verifiable data to the claim. Otherwise, we live in a society where anyone can make a claim, and we have to believe every single person. We'd have to believe.
No, go back. But you're importing this idea of like, oh, it has to be verifiable. Like, it has to be easily accessible for other people to verify in order for that to constitute as evidence. And I'm just saying that's nonsense. Like, that's not most people cannot go out and by themselves verify a lot of the things that they take on testimony.
Right. No, I agree. I don't necessarily care what the population does. I myself, as a student of science, do care, and so do most scientists. We care about
this. Like you do this the same way as well. Like we all do this. This isn't just like, oh, I'm a scientist and like I do things like the right way. Like no, you take things on evidence just as much as everyone else does, and you also believe things that you cannot verify. There are beliefs that you hold that you cannot offer any type of independent evidence for.
Such as.
You believe right now that there's an external world and that you're talking to another person, and this is all not a figment of your mind, right?
Why would I think that?
Okay, so but because no, the point you do believe that, right? You believe that's not the case. You have to believe all this
Oh,
is real.
I think in this instance, belief is irrelevant. I am currently here physically talking to another person on my phone.
But that's circular. I'm asking you, like, so think about yourself. How do you know that you're actually talking to someone who's there?
I have 41 years of reliable data, literally
Okay,
pointing
but
to the
wait,
fact.
but those are experiences. How do you know that seems? It seems to you like you've been around 41 years. It's possible the universe was created 5 minutes ago with foods in our bellies from meals we never ate and memories from things that never happened, right? So, like, how do you
Possible,
show,
yes.
or so how do you show that your experiences of the world and that you're having right now, how do you verify that independently from your
I,
experience?
I already answered you, but to answer again, in that exact situation, the possibility does exist that I was born 1 minute ago and placed with all these billions of memories in my mind of the last 41 years. Yes, that is a possibility. Unfortunately, for the possibility to become plausible still requires verifiable data to the claim.
No. So there's a difference here. There's an issue you're not missing. You're saying, okay, but like that's not plausible because I don't have data for that. What you're saying is, I don't have a defeat of that. I'm asking you, what is your evidence for the accuracy of the experiences you're having right now? And it's not enough just to say, oh well, like I don't have any reason to doubt that. Like I think that's a good answer, but I think when you say that, what you're saying is that because here's my position: if I have an experience of something, I'm rationally justified in going with what seems to me to be the case until I have a defeater. Like I don't have to have something independent come in and verify that I'm actually talking to another person right now, because that can't be the case. Like I can't verify my experiences outside of my experiences. But I have what's called prima facie justification for my beliefs. It seems to me that this is the case, and I don't have any defeaters for it. Therefore, I am justified in taking this to be the
So
case.
we're essentially saying the same thing in different words. That which has no verifiable or falsifiable data is ergo just a concept. For instance, the idea of me being born 5 minutes ago. So there is no data to verify or falsify. It's just a concept. So the plausibility of me existing off the 41 years of reliable data that I have in my mind is all I have to go on. So the prima facie exists in both situations.
You're circular because you're recognizing, you're saying, okay, there are two propositions here, right? One, I was created 5 minutes ago, which is the appearance of age, whatever. And then I had,
You have for that proposal.
and there's another proposal, which is that I have actually existed for 41 years. The things that I've experienced are actually reflections of reality.
Yeah, 41 years
Both
of
of
data.
those things, according to the system that you've gave, both of those things are philosophical concepts. Because the problem is you're thinking this one is verified, but when you appeal to the verification to this, all you're doing is appealing to your experiences. But the question at hand is the validity of your experiences. Like that's what I think you're skipping over, and you're not.
I think you're being very Aristotelian in your thought processes here. So reliable data is sufficient enough to maintain a worldview on. So
Wait. What is reliable data?
reliable data, for instance, I woke up this morning. I had a cold 2 days ago. I had
So when you say you have reliable data from the last 41 years, that's circular because that's assuming you've existed for the last 41 years.
I have memories. Oh, maybe I don't have memories of all 41 years. Of course, I don't remember every single day.
So it
But the
seems to be the case that you've existed for 41 years. So why do you label that as reliable?
because it's literally it's my actual it's the data with which I perceive my worldview, right?
Because it
So
seems to be the case, right? Like it seems to you to be the case that you have
it's
this.
not that it seems to be the case. It is the case until you provide data otherwise.
No, but wait, go back. So you're saying, but see, now you're changing your epistemic position. I love like this.
No,
This
no, no.
actually, I've
I
had
don't even
this
know what that
exact
means, but I didn't.
like 3 or 4 different times with atheists or agnostics over the last few days, because this is what always happens. It always is like this super hyper verificationless, like you have to be able to verify this for this to be true. And then the second I press you guys to the edge of that epistemology and I like get you looking down into the abyss of like solipsism and like Cartesian madness, then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, I don't have to be able to verify it. Now I have these experiences and I can just trust them until you give me a defeater. But that's my position. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying I can trust my experiences, I can trust my seemings until I've given a defeater.
Do you know,
But
what data means in this instance? Data is information, right? It also means facts. I have independently verifiable information based on my own worldview and my own experiences that are reliable data.
Independently verify the veracity of your memory. Independently verify that.
I was literally sick. I have NyQuil next to my bed still.
You're assuming you were actually there. So you have these. It seems to you that you were
Do you
sick.
see how that's okay? Let's take a step back really quick because this is becoming nonsensical. You're
No, I
essentially
love
saying,
this because like atheist epistemology is bonkers, and I love these type of
for
conversations.
one, there is no atheist.
It's so-
There is no such thing as atheist epistemology. Let's be clear about that.
No,
Atheism,
there is.
literally in the word "a," the prefix
Epistemology is
meaning anti-theistic, right? So atheism is only a rejection of theism. There's no epistemology or worldview. There are plenty of
no,
atheistic
that's not a
idiots.
right definition of atheism. You can go to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, look at the entry by atheism, which was written by a philosophical atheist, and he will straight up say that atheism is not just simply the lack of belief of God. It is like the rejection of the proposition.
It is a definition I hold to. The rejection of theism, and that's the only definition I hold to. So if you want to tell me otherwise, then you're essentially playing the no true Scotsman or no true atheist fallacy on me. As an atheist, I claim to
I'm
reject
using the way
theism
atheism
based
is
on
defined
evidence.
I'm using the classic definition of atheism, but I'm not interested in the semantic game. So if you want to call yourself
No,
an
yeah,
atheist,
I mean, I am an atheist because I reject theism based on no evidence that I've seen that convinced me that theism is correct. So that
okay,
is my
so
position.
okay, so then let's go back to the like before we get. Let's not go into that semantic game. Let's then go back to the entire idea of evidence, okay, and then in the idea of not being able to believe something unless it's verifiable, right? The point I'm trying to get you to get is that there are some things that you believe, that we all believe, and the reason we believe it is just because it seems to be the case to us, and we don't have defeaters. And it's not that there's not some thing that comes about that like
With that
like this.
qualifier, I agree.
Okay. It seems to me the case that I have, I have experience with the external world. I don't have any defeater for that. And so I'm rationally justified in believing that.
I mean, yes, you keep saying the word believe, but yes, I'm rationally justified in trusting my experiences with reliable data that I do exist and I am currently here until other such data is presented to me to state otherwise.
You keep importing in like, oh, reliable data. You keep on importing things. Like you have experiences. That's what you've got. And when you say it's reliable, you're importing the authenticity of it. Like that. That's what I'm
Do you speak another language at all? Did you study Spanish or anything?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, how about you studied another subject in college, I imagine, right? Besides philosophy, what other subject did you study?
No, I mean I studied philosophy in college, but then I did a master's in college student personnel services, which is like barely related to philosophy. Yeah.
Oh, I'm not even sure what that means. Well, okay, you took a science class of some kind, right? Like chemistry or
Yeah.
whatever. Okay, so in that class, you were taught to verify the claims that you were being taught. For instance, maybe you were taught how to use the photoelectric effect and kick off an electron from an atom, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Okay, so that verifiable data. When I say data, all I mean is information or facts. Data is verifiable claim, right? So when I take data, I'm not talking about false data. I'm talking about Superman or claims that have no base.
But my experience is data, right?
Yes, your experience is data, which means information, which is a fact. Now, if you're telling me that I'm wrong about existing in my life, that I'm wrong about talking to you on the phone, if I'm wrong about my 41 years of existence on this planet, then I need you to provide data to that claim.
I agree. If I want to convince you of that, I need to provide you a defeater for that, because you're justified in taking your experiences as prima facie justified. Like that's what I'm saying. It's like
Yeah, then I agree. I agree again. This is the third time I said I agree with you.
yeah. Okay, so cool. So we're on board. I'm just pushing it back against this idea of like, oh, you have to be able to like put something in like a you have to be able to put something in a beaker or a test tube and verify.
Oh, no. That's not what verifiable data means. I mean, that's one aspect of science. But for instance, we can't do that with history. We can't put George Washington in a beaker, right? So how do we verify historical sources or historical claims rather?
So with historical claims, I think that we operate in you can operate in kind of an inference to the best explanation way, which is we have a set of data and we try to say, okay, what is the best explanation for this data? Or you could maybe come at it from a Bayesian perspective. It's kind of controversial whether or not we can.
What does that mean?
Like use Bayesian reasoning, like Bayesian theorem, kind of like this equation, and plug that into history. There is controversy in the kind of historical community about whether using something like Bayes is appropriate in history.
Because that's literally my undergrad. I never studied Bayesian. Is that a philosophical concept mainly, or?
It's used in science and in philosophy. Yeah, I mean it's used in forensics, history, philosophy, science. Yeah, Bayesian Bayes as a way of like doing probability. Yeah.
So what I understood from all my history classes was that we take we take claims, we scrutinize them against contemporary resources, then we further scrutinize them against modern data, demarcating fact from fiction.
Yeah, so I think that's a really odd. I think that's a really odd definition of history. I would say more that we take data that we have about, what type of archaeological data do we have? What type of What type of
That's
textual data
yes.
do we
So again, archaeological data, paleontological data, other geographical data, all that kind of stuff that all falls under the umbrella of scrutinizing the claim against contemporary resources, which in resources I mean data, and then we further scrutinize those claims against modern data. So that's what I was saying.
But when you say scrutinize that against modern data, like what are you referring to when we're talking about textual claims about,
So,
I
for
have
instance, if someone claims they jumped to the moon, cracked it in half, and came back down, then we would look for modern data of that fact.
No, but that's highly problematic, and this is just kind of pulling in this really kind of almost human approach or objection to something like miracles. Like, so I don't have to have something occurring in the modern world in order to infer that it happened in the ancient world or something like that. If I look at the data and the best explanation for that data is something that maybe if it's something I've never experienced, well, that doesn't really matter if that's still the best explanation of the data because unique things can happen.
Sure, but let's get down to brass tacks. Let's talk about supernatural claims in the past. And I'm not specifically mentioning Christianity here. Any supernatural claim, whether it was Muhammad or Jesus or Joseph Smith. So how do we separate the fiction from the nonfiction? We scrutinize the claims from any supernatural person or supernatural event against contemporary resources, indicating whether or not the data was sufficient to provide the scrutiny under which it falls under truth. And then we further scrutinize those claims against modern data. Is there a supernatural field of existence? Is there some kind of study that we can study?
No, that's not how history works. No, like it's much simpler than that. We just set this up. It's like, okay, is this data more expected under a supernatural explanation, or is it more expected under a? The Bayes' theorem is more complicated than this, but there's several ways you could do it. So you say, okay, we have to take what is the probability of this thing occurring? Like, what's the probability of a resurrection occurring? So that's
almost zero.
I disagree with that. I think that's completely false. And if you want to make that claim, I'm gonna put it on you to prove that prior probability. But we can come back to that. I also have to say I only have like 15 minutes, and then I have to go to class.
What are you studying, bro?
I'm doing a doctorate in theology. Yeah, I forgot what I was doing.
That's awesome, man. Like honestly, I truly, truly, truly respect any intellect, regardless of our positions on faith or etc. I really appreciate intellectual honesty and anyone's ambition to further educate themselves is a phenomenal position to hold, in my opinion. So that's awesome.
So if you want to use Bayes, which again, like people in philosophy are like using people in history a lot of times are like listen.
Yeah, can you spell that for me, brother, really quick? Can you spell that for me?
Yeah, Bayes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So a lot of people in history are like, listen, we shouldn't be using Bayes in history because of problems with assigning prior probability. And so, whether or not we do that, whatever. If you're going to do it with Bayes, you would say, okay, I have the prior probability of something like a resurrection or a man jumping to the moon or whatever. So that's part of the data that we have to put in. But then there's other data we have to put in as well. We have to say, what is the probability that we would have the data we have right now if that person resurrected? So like, what's the probability that we would have this data under this hypothesis? And so that's
probability of data itself. That's what Bayes is?
Well, it kind of, but then we also have to take in other data. So just like, what is the probability we would have the data that we have right now if Jesus didn't resurrect from the dead or something like that? So like it's like an equation that you have to plug these into. And it's difficult. And so it helps us from a conceptual standpoint. It's not, I don't think it can be used if you're trying to plug in exact numbers, but if we use this as kind of a conceptual framework, and we don't try to get hung up in the numbers, then I think that we can use that. But in a way that I go about this is I just want to say, okay, what's the best explanation for the data? And then evaluate explanations based on things like explanatory scope, explanatory power, parsimony, like ad hocness, coherence.
Did you actually mean the best explanation for the claim?
No, I mean best explanation for the data. So someone might say, okay, if we look at this,
are you suggesting there's data for resurrection?
Yes.
Independently verifiable or falsifiable data?
Yeah, so there's data regarding the life of Christ that is widely recognized among most.
Yeah, we're not discussing his existence. We're discussing the resurrection supernatural event.
Yeah. But so then I may say, I could make the argument that the best explanation for the data surrounding the life of Jesus is the hypothesis that he rose from the dead, or the explanation that he rose from the dead. So then I would be explaining the data with the theory or with the explanation that Jesus rose from the dead.
So how about Muhammad?
Yeah, I don't think we have as good data regarding him, and I talk with Muslims all the time with him. And
we have more data for Islam than we do for Christianity based on Jesus Christ's life.
Absolutely crazy. That is not even remotely true. The earliest, whoa, I'm gonna roast you so hard if you say that. Listen, the earliest biographical data we have on Muhammad comes 200 years after his supposed life, and even then, it's from a guy who explicitly admits he's edited the source to remove data that he found that was embarrassing to Muhammad. That's the earliest biographical stuff. All the hadith hadith come at least 200 years afterwards. The earliest copies of the hadith and things like that are usually 300 to 400 years or even 500 years for the earliest hadith, like the Bukhari. With Jesus, the earliest data that we have with a pre-Pauline Creed, 3 to 5 years after Jesus' death. Earliest manuscripts, we have manuscripts in the probably by the middle of the 2nd century. They are not even remotely comparable from a
I
historical.
didn't know that, so I'll pivot. Well, how about Joseph Smith? Do we have more? Do we know more about Joseph Smith and his life than we do about Jesus Christ?
Wait, so I'm curious. Are you willing to concede that you
No, I
messed
did. I conceded. I didn't
So
realize that
I
it was.
deal with Muslims all the time when here, so I'm ready to throw if somebody wants to
So
make that.
let's talk about Joseph Smith. Do we have more data on the life of Joseph Smith than we do of Jesus Christ? Let's be honest here.
No, I don't. So regarding his life or regarding the
We knew
things
what food he ate, for instance. We knew
Okay, so, like,
we know
I'm
where he
fine.
lived. We have his addresses. Do we have more data for Joseph Smith than we do for Jesus Christ?
So I'm going to say the same thing that you said earlier, which is like saying, okay, like I think they're comparable. I think that the data that
Do we have more on it? Do we have more data for Donald Trump than we do George Washington?
oh yeah, sure. I'll say we have more data for someone like
So then we have
Donald
more
Trump.
data for Joseph Smith than we do Jesus Christ based on historical context. I'm
If
not
you
saying whether or not Joseph Smith is true or Jesus is true or wrong. I'm saying the actual data that we have for the person is
sure,
by far.
I can grant that. Yeah, sure. Any historical person who's more recent, who's been around, has more documents about them. They're going to have more data.
Yeah.
But now that's
Honestly, that was just an intellectually honest question that I do with certain Christians just to see if they're being intellectually honest.
yeah, like we have more data about someone like Donald Trump than we do like Jesus or whatever. But that doesn't mean I think all the claims about Joseph Smith have equal amount of data as the claims about Jesus.
Really? He has 8 witnesses on the front page of the Book of Mormon. Was that not more
Yeah,
eyewitness
so, but
testimony?
there's issues surrounding the supposed witnesses. Some of them have come out and said that Joseph Smith pressured them into kind of signing this document. There's also been people who have recanted on that. They also did not offer that testimony in a hostile environment. They weren't, there wasn't on pain of death that they had to offer that testimony, like is the case with.
Is that the requisite for testimony? Is pain of death?
No, I think that it is a difference though between something like Christianity and something either like Joseph Smith or is like Islam. Like it's one thing to come about and say, oh yeah, like I saw these golden tablets. But then if we look and the guy who says, oh yeah, I saw these golden tablets, is like, Joseph Smith pressured me into it. I really didn't actually see it. I actually, I just kind of got a glimpse of it. And if there's no negative consequences, like it's one thing if these guys are like, yes, I saw the tablets. I'm 100% certain and I'm ready to die for that. That's a lot different than someone just signing their name next to something saying I saw it and they don't have to offer any repercussions. With Christianity, we have probably at least half of the earliest disciples who either were martyred or were willing to be martyred for the claims that they were making. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily true. It just means it shows they were authentic about the claims that they were making and they were serious.
I'm glad you qualified that because you're right. It doesn't mean it's true because we have lots of people that martyr for their faith.
Yeah, but it shows the sincerity of what they were saying. It shows the sincerity of that they believed with what they were saying. With Joseph Smith, I don't think we have that when it comes to the gold tablets or anything like that.
Well, see, as an atheist, I don't look at it contextually from a spiritual point of view. I look at the data. Who has more witness accounts? Who has more data on the people that those witnesses are claiming to be?
It isn't just about the witnesses accounts. It's about, do we have any defeaters? Do we have any defeaters for that data? So listen,
there isn't because it's not.
Well, no, with Joseph Smith, I think we do. I think we have strong defeaters with Joseph Smith that we don't have for Jesus. Listen, if we had guys who were, if we had defeaters for Christianity or for the testimony of something like the author of the Book of Luke, right? If we had early, first or even early 2nd century sources who are just being like, who is even this Jesus guy? He didn't die on the cross. He rode off into the sunset and went to Asia or something like that. Like if we had like really strong critiques that were saying like, no, this is wrong, or if we had a bunch of testimonies saying, Luke later admitted that he actually just kind of made a bunch of that stuff up, that would be defeaters for that testimony, and I would be like really reluctant to like hang on to my faith at that point. Like that would be something I would really have to grapple with, and I would have to take into my explanation. We have defeaters with Joseph Smith. And so it's not just like, okay, how many claims do we have? It's how many defeaters, it's how many claims, like how many witnesses to an event, but then how many defeaters do we have? Do we have, in the case of Joseph Smith, we have reasons to doubt the testimony that we're given? It's like, okay, well, if that's the case, it don't matter. It doesn't matter if you have 100 people offering witnesses if I have a bunch of reasons to discount those, So let me give you one more example here. And I'll try to wrap this up in 5 minutes. That way it gives me a 5-minute grace period. I mean, it's on Zoom, but yeah. So let's say I had 100 people who were actually. This is I think a good example. I think you'll like.
And popular fallacy, though, isn't it?
Huh?
Ad populum fallacy.
No, hear me out, because that's no sense. Let's say you had 100 people who are like, I have direct testimony that, I don't know, some guy did something.
Like
And
Saint
then
Bob.
no, listen, just chill out,
Oh, sorry.
okay?
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm about to give you a reason to why you don't want to trust these 100 people. So just hang on, just hang with me here.
That's a little bit.
So let's say that I have 100 people and they say, hey, listen, we saw this guy do this thing. But then you found out that they were using those claims to get like substantial monetary gain. Like, I don't know, maybe this is like some pyramid scheme type thing where they're like, oh yeah, listen, come here, and all of our top earners X Y Z. Like they present information, and you say, well, you have a defeater maybe. One defeater is you say, okay, not only are there no negative consequences for them saying this, it's like they're actively benefiting from it, right? Or going back to our guy who's like, hey, listen, me and my 10 friends say that if you give me $100, I'll give you $1 million. Like that seems like I have a defeater for the 10 claims I have here. So that's an instance that I would say like, great, you can. If I see like an ulterior motive there, or if I see like a strong defeater there, like monetary gain, like that could potentially be a defeater, which undercuts the number of witnesses you have. But I will say that if you have a number of different witnesses who are all offering testimony to something, I think that we should trust that testimony in the absence of a defeater. And I'm consistent with that epistemology, whether it be Joseph Smith, Jesus, Muslims, Bhagavad Gita, what is it? The Bhagavad Gita,
Yeah,
all of
Bhagavad Gita.
that. Like I'm consistent. Like testimony is innocent till proven guilty, and I apply that across all religious traditions. And I'm 100% prepared to grant that there are supernatural things that happen in religious traditions other than my own.
Based on what data?
If they're in religious traditions that have data was like if it's a bunch of people who they're offering to me testimony and there aren't defeaters for that testimony and they seem sincere and they're giving me testimony about what they've experienced, I'm completely prepared to I'm prepared. I'm not saying I have done it for anything yet because I haven't seen any actual data that meets this criteria, but I'm prepared to admit that if it's there. I just haven't seen
I
it with
understand
other.
it. So in your own church, I mean, I actually don't know if you do you go to church?
Yeah, I haven't.
So in your church, if someone declares, I spoke with Jesus last night, and they mean it as in I had a verbal conversation, do you take them at word value, or do you ask for more verifiable data?
I'll take them face value on that unless I have a defeater. If they say, hey, listen, Jesus spoke to me last night and he said we should all become Muslim, I'd be like, okay, I think I have a defeater for that because that directly contradicts like the entire message of the Bible. I think it's more likely that's probably something demonic or something like that. But if I don't have a defeater for their testimony, like I'll follow them on that.
So in
Yeah.
1823, before the Book of Mormon was even a concept, when Joseph Smith declared that he met with Jesus Christ, would you believe him on face value or ask for independently verifiable data to his claim?
If he just came at me and he said, hey, like Jesus appeared to me, like Jesus gave me a vision, off the bat, I'd be like, okay, cool. Like I'm on board. Like I believe you so far. But then if he tells me stuff that contradicts the historical data that we have about what Jesus taught, then that's what would be provided a feeder for that testimony.
I love that you are intellectually consistent. That is fantastic. So I'm probably gonna be a friend of yours at some point in the future, I imagine. Or at least
I'm 100% ready to if I see the data for it, I'm 100% ready to admit that there is miracles or supernatural experiences that occur in other religious traditions. Because here's the thing, I think there are supernatural things at play in other religious traditions. Like I think there are other spirits in the world, and I think there are like in pagan religions and stuff like that. I think that they are actually probably interacting with an actual supernatural reality. So if you want to say, okay, like I have this tribe of pagans, and they're like, yeah, we did this ritual, and like the spirit talked to us, I'd be like, yeah, great. I think you probably did actually talk to a spirit. Like I think that's the best explanation for the data. If I have an entire tribe of people being like, yo, we saw this, like this actually happened, and like I will be consistent with my epistemology, and if I'm not, by all means, call me out on it.
no, that's fantastic. I'm consistent with mine as well. Obviously, you don't think that there are any supernatural events of any kind whatsoever on Earth without the independently verifiable data to verify it. But I really respect you, and that's the best thing we can go is to leave at that. Is that I respect you immensely as an intellect, and I appreciate your time with me.
I appreciate your time. So I have 5 minutes. I'm going to ask you, and we don't have to get into the weeds of this because I don't have time to. And I'm pulling it up on my side monitor while we speak, so I can just quickly bop off with you and get on there. It seems to me like we have an enormous amount of testimony that there is actual supernatural things occurring in the world. There are hundreds of millions of people who have offered.
Ad populum fallacies make no difference to me.
No. But that's not a populum fallacy. If we're asking the question, if I wake up in the morning and my mom says to me, hey, listen, an alien spaceship showed up above our house last night, I would be like, Mom, what'd you eat? You know what I mean? What'd you eat last night? But
Mushrooms or something.
but then if she's like, no, listen, and she turns on the news and like the news reporter is saying it, and then she gets on Facebook and there's like millions of people talking about it, and it's like everyone was like, okay, like now the best explanation for all of this testimony I'm getting, the most parsimonious explanation, is the fact that like there was actually probably an alien spaceship there. Now, that's not an argument at Populum. That's me saying I have all this independent data. I have all these independent sources of testimony telling me what their experience. The best explanation for that data is that this happened. And I would say with miracle claims, we have a large amount of miracle claims, like hundreds of millions of people saying, like, no, I had a serious like medical condition. It was prayed for, and then it healed overnight. And in fact, some of these have verifiable data by them. And by verifiable data, I mean we have doctors who have provided medical records both before and after the healing. And I can give you specific references for this.
Sure, I've researched some of them, as well as NDEs, near-death experiences.
So a case report, so this is the title of a paper, a case report of instantaneous resolution of juvenile macular degeneration blindness after proximal intercessory prayer. There was a woman who was blind for most of her life, was blind for I think over a decade. She had juvenile macular degeneration and then quickly recovered spontaneously after having proximal intercessory prayer. Very similar to that is a case report of gastroparesis healing, 16 years of chronic syndrome resolved after proximal intercessory prayer. These are instances in which they are long-term chronic illnesses in which there was no, this isn't just something like, oh, I had a cold and I got over it. This was a long-term chronic illness. In the case that I just mentioned, in which it was a case report of the gastrointestinal issue, he was unable to process food in his stomach.
It would rot in his stomach. I actually suffered arbitrarily.
So he had a G tube and a J tube, and then essentially overnight he was then able to go back to healing, and so that's been investigated by several medical professionals, and that can be found on the website I'm using is Science Direct. If you say
no, for sure, yeah, and I'll totally look it up. One last thing is we just discovered a new biological. They're calling it an entity. I think it's called the. Oh man, I forgot the name. I just researched this too. But there's a new biological entity inside of our mouths in the lining of our intestines, which we hadn't discovered before. I forgot what the name of the cell is called, but they look like little poles, I guess, like little round bottles. It's really interesting. You should look into that. Just as a fascinating topic of biology.
into that. So if you're really interested in modern miracle claims, I'm going to leave you just with a few resources that I think you might find interesting.
I've done my research over the last 20 years, but I'm more open to as much data as you want to give.
Yeah, so I have a buddy of mine who is writing. He's writing a book on this at the moment. He keeps on saying this is going to be published soon. His name is Caleb Jackson. He's done a couple interviews on the data that he has right now. So I don't know if you've read any of the stuff by Craig Keener. Craig Keener has two books. One is 2 volumes, and it's kind of an in-depth look at miracles both in the ancient world and more recent miracles now. That one is called like Miracles 2 volumes. If you Google that into Amazon or whatever, it'll pull up. But then he has another book called Miracles Today, which he kind of gets more into the nitty-gritty of some really specific recent contemporary medical miracles that are similar to the one I just mentioned. In fact, I think he mentions the one I just mentioned in his book.
My ex-wife was actually a doctor, so I love biological sciences. So I'll look into it. So Caleb Jackson and Craig Keener?
Yeah, and if you Google, I'm actually going to direct you to a specific video that because it had a skeptic on it who was also I think a medical expert, and so they kind of went back and forth. 1 second, let me find that name real quick.
Sure, I'm gonna try to find that biological entity that I was talking about too.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna give you the name of this video on YouTube. And the reason I'm giving this is because, like I said, it has a skeptic on it, so you can kind of hear both and back. And I think the guy Joshua Brown is one of the guys who's done some of the medical research on this. So the name of the video it's Craig Keener, Peter May, and Joshua Brown. Miracle healing. Does it happen today? So if you type in Craig Keener, if you go into YouTube and you type in Craig Keener miracles debate, it's the first thing that pops up. It has like 4 guys on it. That's a good discussion between Craig Keener and Josh Brown, who've done research in this area. Yeah, I think I'm interested in how you would respond to something like that as someone who thinks that there are no modern miracles. I do have to go.
I'll watch it. If you don't mind, I'll watch it and DM you in the next couple of days.
Yeah.
And the new biological entity in our system is called the obelisk, and they have obelins And it is fascinating, right? You should look in. It's just biology, but it's nothing to do with what we were talking about. Yeah, it's just pretty cool.
All right, I gotta hop off. Yeah, send me that stuff in a DM. Thank you for everybody who was chilling out here. I'm sorry to the people who didn't get to talk in the thing. Thank you, Sway, for coming up and having a chat with me. I really
Hey, my
enjoyed it.
pleasure. Likewise. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Yeah, dude, take care.
You too.